A widowed soldier, raising his daughter alone, steps into a hospital to give his time and his heart. But when a rich patient, bitter, broken, and forgotten by her own children, meets his kindness, something unexpected happens. She doesn't just accept his help, she begins to fall for it. For the first time in years, she feels alive again. But just as hope takes root, shadows rise. Her powerful family storms back, furious, and they'll stop at nothing to tear him away. Whispers of betrayal, greed, and legal battles threaten to destroy everything: his honor, her freedom, and their fragile bond. Now the question is, can love born in the unlikeliest place survive a war of lies and family secrets? Or will kindness itself be put on trial? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The first rays of sunlight crept through the kitchen window as Jack Reynolds stood at the stove, expertly flipping pancakes. The sizzle of butter and gentle bubbling of coffee filled the quiet morning air. His movements were precise, practiced a routine carved from years of early mornings, first in the military and now as a single father. He glanced at his watch. 5:45 a.m., right on schedule. The house around him held that peculiar stillness that comes before dawn, when the world seems to pause between night and day. Family photos lined the walls, catching hints of the growing light. Most showed Emily at various ages, her smile bright and constant. In a few, Jack's late wife Sarah beamed at the camera, her eyes full of life, even in frozen moments. Jack's throat tightened, as it often did when he looked at those pictures. He turned back to the stove, focusing on the task at hand. The pancakes were golden brown, just the way Emily liked them. "Dad?" Emily's sleepy voice carried from upstairs. "Is that coffee I smell? And pancakes?" he called back, his voice warming. "Better hurry before they get cold." Footsteps thumped down the stairs, and Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. At 16, she carried herself with a grace that reminded Jack so much of her mother it sometimes took his breath away. "You didn't have to make breakfast again," she said, dropping into her usual chair. "I could have just had cereal." Jack set a plate of pancakes in front of her, along with butter and syrup. "What kind of father would I be if I let my daughter face calculus on an empty stomach?" Emily rolled her eyes but smiled, digging in. "You're going to the hospital today, right? Same as always." Jack poured himself a cup of coffee, leaving the pancakes for Emily. He'd eaten his own breakfast earlier, a simple bowl of oatmeal while watching the stars fade from the sky. "Mrs. Henderson still giving you trouble about the crossword puzzles?" Jack chuckled. "She insists I'm cheating somehow. Says no one can know that many 7-letter words." "Well, you did spend all those years reading dictionaries to beat Grandpa at Scrabble. That's classified information, young lady." Their shared laughter filled the kitchen, pushing back the morning quiet. These moments were precious to Jack's simple conversations over breakfast, watching his daughter grow into her own person. But when the laughter faded, that familiar ache settled back in his chest. The empty chair at the table seemed to grow more noticeable. Emily must have sensed his mood shift. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Mom would be proud of you, you know. All the volunteering you do, helping people." Jack squeezed back, managing a smile. "Finish your breakfast, kiddo. You'll be late for school." While Emily ate, Jack packed her lunch: turkey, sandwich, apple, granola bar, and a little note tucked in the bottom of the bag. He'd started writing them when she was in first grade, and though she pretended to be too old for them now, he sometimes found the notes carefully preserved in her desk drawer. By 6:30, Emily was heading out the door, giving him a quick hug. "Don't let any grumpy patients get you down today," she said. "I'll do my best. Study hard." Jack watched until her car disappeared around the corner, then went upstairs to change. His volunteer uniform was simple khakis and a blue polo shirt with the hospital logo. He smoothed the fabric, checking his reflection in the mirror. The face that looked back at him was weathered but kind, with crow's feet at the corners of his eyes from years of smiling through hard times. The drive to the hospital was peaceful, streets still mostly empty in the early morning light. Jack parked in his usual spot, nodding to the security guard as he walked in. The hospital halls were already bustling with the shift change between night and day staff. "Morning, Jack," Nurse Linda called from the nurses' station. "You're just in time. Mrs. Peterson's been asking when you'd arrive something about defending her honor in the weekly bingo tournament." Jack laughed, signing in on the volunteer sheet. Tell her I've been practicing my calling voice. The familiar routine settled over him as he made his rounds. He delivered magazines to the recovery ward, helped an elderly man with his breakfast tray, and spent 20 minutes untangling Mrs. Peterson's yarn for her knitting project. The work wasn't glamorous, but it filled the empty hours and gave him purpose. More importantly, it helped him forget the silence of his own house, the space left behind by Sarah's passing 5 years ago. Here, surrounded by people who needed him, Jack could focus on others instead of his own loneliness. By mid-morning, he was pushing an empty wheelchair down the third-floor hallway, humming softly to himself. The sound echoed off the sterile walls, mixing with the usual hospital noise, beeping machines, squeaking shoes, distant conversations. "Jack?" Nurse Linda's voice made him pause. She stood in the doorway of the nurse's station, holding a patient file. Her expression was carefully neutral, but he knew that look. It was the one she wore when she had a particularly challenging assignment. "I've got a new patient for you," she said, lowering her voice. "Room 316. Well, let's just say she's been giving everyone a hard time since she arrived yesterday." Jack nodded, understanding. He'd dealt with difficult patients before. Sometimes people lashed out when they were scared or in pain. Sometimes they just needed someone to listen. "What's her name?" he asked, turning the wheelchair toward room 316. "Claire Whitmore. She's recovering from surgery and—" Linda hesitated. "Just be prepared. She's not very receptive to help right now." Jack squared his shoulders, drawing on years of military discipline and parental patience. "I'll do my best." "I know you will," Linda said softly. "That's why I asked for you specifically." As Jack approached room 316, he could hear muffled voices inside, someone complaining about the food, the beds, the temperature. He took a deep breath, reminding himself why he volunteered. Because everyone deserved kindness, especially those who seemed to need it most. He'd learned that lesson the hard way after Sarah died, when Emily's unwavering love had pulled him back from his own darkness. Sometimes, the most difficult people were the ones hurting the most. Jack paused outside the door, straightened his volunteer badge, and prepared to meet his new patient. The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the hospital corridor as Jack approached room 412. He adjusted his volunteer badge, its plastic surface worn from years of use, and gave a gentle knock on the door before entering. "I said come in properly." A sharp voice cut through the air. "Don't they teach basic manners to volunteers these days?" Jack stepped into a private room that was far more decorated than the usual sterile spaces. Fresh flowers filled crystal vases on nearly every surface, and silk throws draped across the standard-issue hospital furniture, transforming the institutional setting into something more elegant. In the center of it all sat Claire Whitmore. Even in a hospital gown, she managed to look regal. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and a string of pearls adorned her neck, definitely not standard hospital attire. Her manicured hands rested on top of an expensive-looking blanket, and her sharp blue eyes fixed on Jack with clear disapproval. "I apologize, ma'am," Jack said, his voice steady and warm. "Would you like me to step out and knock again?" Claire's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched higher. "Don't be smart with me. I've had quite enough of people treating me like I'm just another patient to be managed." She gestured dismissively at the array of get-well cards on her bedside table. "These nurses act like I should be grateful for basic care. Do you know who I am?" "I'm Jack Reynolds, one of the morning volunteers," he replied, choosing not to engage with her question. His calm demeanor remained unchanged as he moved a step closer, hands relaxed at his sides. "I'm here to see if you need anything to make your stay more comfortable." "Oh, wonderful," Claire said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Another well-meaning do-gooder who thinks a cheerful attitude can fix everything. She shifted in her bed, wincing slightly, a small crack in her polished facade. "Tell me, Mr. Reynolds, what qualifies you to be here, besides an abundance of free time and a desire to feel useful?" Jack absorbed the barb without flinching. His weathered face showed no sign of offense, just patient attention. "I've found that sometimes people just need someone to talk to, or to fetch them a magazine, or help adjust their pillows." He smiled slightly. "Nothing too complicated, ma'am. And I suppose you expect gratitude for these simple tasks?" Claire reached for her water glass, her hand trembling almost imperceptibly. Before she could grasp it, Jack stepped forward smoothly and steadied the glass for her. She paused, clearly caught off guard by his quick but unobtrusive assistance. For a moment, her carefully maintained expression faltered. "No gratitude necessary," Jack said quietly, stepping back once she had a firm grip on the glass. "It's just water." Claire took a sip, using the moment to study him over the rim of her glass. Her eyes caught the small pin on his volunteer lanyard, a military service emblem. "You were in the service?" she asked, her tone slightly less harsh. "Yes, ma'am, 25 years. And now you're here, bringing water to difficult patients." There was a question buried in her statement, though she tried to mask it with disdain. Jack's smile remained gentle. "Now I'm here doing what needs doing. Some days, that means water. Other days, it means listening. Whatever helps." Claire set down her glass with a precise movement. "Well, I don't need either at the moment. You may go." She turned her attention to the window, a clear dismissal. "Of course," Jack replied, his voice still carrying that same steady warmth. "I'll be around if you change your mind. The call button works just fine, but if you'd prefer, you can always ask the nurses to send me." He turned toward the door, his steps unhurried. Behind him, he could feel Claire's eyes following his movement, her gaze heavy, with something more complicated than mere irritation. Just before he reached the threshold, her voice came again, marginally softer than before. "Mr. Reynolds?" He paused, turning back. "Yes, ma'am. Next time, knock properly." The words were still sharp, but there was the faintest hint of something else in her expression. A flicker of interest, quickly masked behind her practiced scowl. "I'll remember that," Jack replied simply. He gave her a respectful nod and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Through the narrow window in the door, he caught one last glimpse of Claire. She was still staring after him, her forehead slightly creased, as if confronted with a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. The afternoon sun streaming through her window caught the silver in her hair, and for just a moment, her carefully constructed walls seemed to waver. Jack straightened his badge and continued down the hallway, ready for his next task. Behind him, room 412 fell quiet. But it was a different kind of quiet than before, one filled with unspoken questions about the volunteer who met coldness with unwavering kindness. The morning sun filtered through the hospital's half-drawn blinds as Jack made his way down the now familiar corridor. His well-worn sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, and the sound of distant medical equipment created a steady background rhythm. He carried a small canvas bag filled with books, paperbacks mostly, their spines creased from countless readings. When he reached room 412, Jack took a deep breath and knocked firmly this time. 3 distinct raps. "Yes, what is it now?" Claire Whitmore's voice carried that same edge from yesterday, sharp as a winter wind. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore. It's Jack Reynolds, the volunteer from yesterday." He entered with measured steps, maintaining a respectful distance from her bed. "I brought some books today. Would you like me to read to you?" Claire sat propped up against her pillows, her silver hair perfectly arranged despite her hospital stay. She wore a silk robe over her hospital gown, designer by the look of it, and her manicured fingers clutched a cell phone that hadn't buzzed once during his visit yesterday. "I'm perfectly capable of reading on my own, Mr. Reynolds." She lifted her chin slightly. "I don't need to be entertained like some child." Jack nodded, keeping his expression gentle. "Of course, I just thought you might enjoy some company." "Well, I don't." She turned to look out the window, dismissing him. "I understand. I'll be reading to Mr. Martinez next door if you change your mind." Jack's voice remained steady, kind. He settled into the chair in the adjacent room, positioning himself near the doorway. Mr. Martinez, an elderly man recovering from hip surgery, welcomed him with a warm smile. "Jack, good to see you, amigo." "Good morning, Mr. Martinez. I brought that book about deep-sea fishing you mentioned yesterday." As Jack began to read, his voice carried naturally into Claire's room. He didn't raise it intentionally, that would have been too obvious. Instead, he let the words flow with the gentle cadence he'd developed over years of reading to patients. The old man's weather-beaten hands gripped the fishing rod as the sun rose over the Gulf of Mexico. Jack read. 40 years he'd been coming to these waters, and still every dawn felt like the first time. Through the corner of his eye, he noticed Claire's head turned slightly toward the sound of his voice. She maintained her rigid posture, but her fingers had stopped tapping restlessly against her phone. The story continued, painting pictures of salty breezes and crystal waters, a friendship between old fishermen who spoke more through shared silences than words. Mr. Martinez closed his eyes, smiling, while Jack turned each page with careful precision. After about 20 minutes, a nurse came to check Mr. Martinez's vitals, and Jack paused the reading. As he stood to give them space, he glimpsed Claire quickly turning her head back toward the window, as if caught listening. "Same time tomorrow, Mr. Martinez?" Jack asked, loud enough to be heard in both rooms. "Please, my friend, bring the rest of the story." Jack gathered his things and stepped into the hallway. He hesitated for a moment outside Claire's door, but decided against another attempt today. Sometimes, he'd learned, the kindest thing was to give people space to lower their own walls. The rest of his volunteer shift passed quickly, helping with lunch trays, keeping an elderly gentleman company while his wife went to get coffee, wheeling a young mother to her physical therapy session. By the time Jack signed out at the volunteer desk, the afternoon sun had begun its descent. At home, Emily had already started dinner. The smell of spaghetti sauce filled their modest kitchen as Jack hung his jacket by the door. Their evening routine was well practiced. Emily doing homework at the kitchen table while stirring the sauce, Jack setting places for two at their small dining table. "How was school?" he asked, placing forks beside their plates. "Pretty good. I aced my history test." Emily looked up from her textbook. "But Dad, you look tired. Rough day at the hospital?" Jack settled into his chair, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Not rough, exactly. Just interesting." Emily served the spaghetti, the steam rising between them. "Interesting? How?" "There's a new patient, a woman who doesn't know she needs a friend yet." He twirled pasta around his fork. "Sometimes people build walls so high, they forget how to let anyone see over them." "Like Mrs. Chen last year?" Emily referenced a previous patient who'd eventually become one of Jack's success stories. "You said she used to throw her lunch tray at you." Jack chuckled. "No flying trays this time, but the same kind of loneliness, I think, just wrapped in fancier packaging." Emily reached across the table and squeezed her father's hand. "You'll figure it out, Dad. You always do." They ate in comfortable silence for a few moments before Emily spoke again. "Want me to pack you an extra sandwich tomorrow? Sometimes it helps to share food." Jack looked at his daughter, so young, yet so wise in the ways of human hearts. "That's very thoughtful, sweetheart. But I think for now, we'll stick with books and patience." The evening light painted their kitchen walls golden, and Jack felt the day's tension ease from his shoulders. Tomorrow would bring another opportunity to crack the ice around Claire Whitmore's heart, but for now, he was content to share this quiet moment with his daughter, grateful for the simple gift of being needed, being useful, being kind. The spaghetti was slightly overcooked, the garlic bread a little too brown on one side, but to Jack, it was perfect. Just like their small house with its mismatched furniture and the faded photos of Emily's mother on the walls. Not everything beautiful came in perfect packages. Sometimes the most precious things were hidden behind sharp edges and careful masks, waiting for someone patient enough to discover them. The morning light streamed through the hospital window, casting long shadows across Claire Whitmore's room. Jack noticed immediately that something was different. Claire sat rigid in her bed, her face drawn and pale, her normally perfect posture slightly hunched. Her hands gripped the edge of her blanket so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "I told the nurses I don't need anything," she said through clenched teeth, not meeting his eyes. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," Jack said softly, remaining by the doorway. "Would you like me to come back later?" Claire's laugh was brittle. "Oh, just come in. We both know you'll return anyway. Like some persistent stray cat." Jack entered slowly, noting how she winced when she tried to adjust her position. The morning medication must have worn off, but her chart showed the next dose wasn't due for another hour. "Would you like me to call the nurse?" he asked. "No!" The word came out sharp and quick. "I don't need anyone's help. Especially not yours." Jack settled into the chair beside her bed, his movements deliberate and unhurried. "Sometimes sitting quietly with someone helps pass the time until things get better." "Is that what this is?" Claire's voice raised slightly. "You're here to watch me suffer and feel good about yourself? To pity the wealthy woman who's all alone in her hospital room?" Her words came faster now, tight with pain and something deeper. "I've seen how you look at me, Mr. Reynolds. Like I'm some puzzle to solve, some poor lost soul who needs saving." Jack remained still, his hands resting calmly in his lap. "Pain has a way of making us say things we don't mean. Don't patronize me." Claire's eyes flashed. You walk around here with your quiet smile and your gentle words playing the hero. But you don't know anything about me or my life. You're right, Jack said simply. I don't know your story, but I know something about pain. Not just the physical kind. Claire turned to look at him then, perhaps surprised by the slight roughness that had crept into his steady voice. When I came back from my last tour, Jack continued, his eyes focused on the window beyond Claire's bed. Everything was quiet, too quiet. No explosions, no shouting, no constant vigilance, just silence. And in that silence, all the memories got louder. He paused, and Claire didn't interrupt. The morning bustle of the hospital seemed to fade away. My wife, Sarah, his voice softened around her name. She knew how to handle the silence. She'd put on music, or talk about her day teaching, or just sit with me. She understood that sometimes the hardest battles happen after you come home. Jack's hands clasped together, his wedding ring catching the light. When we found out she was sick, she was more worried about Emily and me than herself. Emily was only 8 then. Sarah made me promise to keep telling stories. Said that stories help us feel less alone. He drew a slow breath. The night Sarah died, the silence came back. But this time, I had a little girl who needed breakfast made, and homework checked, and someone to tuck her in at night. I had to learn how to fill the silence with new sounds. Emily's laugh, the scrape of pancakes on the griddle, bedtime stories that Sarah used to tell. Claire's hands had loosened their grip on the blanket. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. I started volunteering here, Jack continued, because empty houses and quiet rooms can make the pain feel bigger than it is. And sometimes, Mrs. Whitmore, the bravest thing we can do is let someone else sit with us in our pain, even if we think we don't need them. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of medical equipment. Claire's shoulders began to shake, and then, like a dam breaking, she started to cry. Not delicate tears, but deep, racking sobs that seemed to come from years of held-back grief. Jack didn't move to comfort her. He just sat, a steady presence, as morning sunlight filled the room and Claire's sobs gradually quieted. Finally, she wiped her eyes with the edge of her blanket. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse but had lost its sharp edge. "Thank you, Mr. Reynolds." The words came out barely above a whisper. "Thank you for not leaving." The hospital corridor buzzed with its usual morning activity as Jack guided Emily through the maze of hallways. His daughter walked beside him, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She'd insisted on coming today, curious about the people her father spent his mornings with. "Remember what I told you about Mrs. Whitmore?" Jack asked, adjusting his volunteer badge. Emily nodded, her brown eyes twinkling. "The one who reminds you of that strict librarian from my elementary school?" She grinned. "The one who used to chase kids with her ruler when they ran in the library?" "Emily," Jack warned but couldn't help smiling. "She's just particular about things, and she's been through a lot." "Dad, you worry too much." Emily bounced on her toes as they walked. "I promise I won't say anything about rulers." They stopped first at Mr. Peterson's room, where Emily charmed the elderly man with stories about her science project. She even got him to demonstrate his famous coin tricks, something Jack hadn't managed in weeks of visits. In Mrs. Rodriguez's room, Emily spoke broken Spanish she'd learned in school, making the woman beam with delight. As they approached Claire's room, Jack felt his shoulders tense. But before he could knock, they heard a sharp intake of breath and a muffled sound of pain from inside. Emily looked up at her father, concern crossing her young face. Jack knocked gently on the door. "What is it now?" Claire's voice came through, strained but maintaining its usual edge. "It's Jack Reynolds, Mrs. Whitmore. I've brought someone to meet you today." There was a pause. "I suppose you might as well come in." Claire sat in her usual spot by the window, but her usual perfect posture was slightly slumped. Her silver hair, normally immaculate, looked slightly disheveled. She'd been trying to reach for something on her side table, Jack realized, and had probably pulled at her stitches. "Mrs. Whitmore, this is my daughter, Emily." Emily stepped forward without hesitation. "Hi, Mrs. Whitmore. Dad's told me all about you. Is it true you used to be an artist? He mentioned seeing some sketches in your room the other day." Claire blinked, caught off guard by Emily's directness. "I dabbled. Years ago." She straightened slightly in her chair. "Nothing serious," Mom used to say there's no such thing as dabbling in art, Emily said, settling into a nearby chair as if she'd been visiting Claire for years. Either you create or you don't. Dad tried to draw once. It was supposed to be a horse for my school project. It looked more like a weird dog with a really long neck. Jack felt his cheeks warm. It wasn't that bad, Dad. Emily gave him a look. Mrs. Martinez asked if it was supposed to be a giraffe. A sound escaped Claire, something between a snort and a chuckle. She quickly covered it with a cough, but her eyes had lost some of their usual frost. Well, your father has other talents, I'm sure, Claire said, her tone softer than Jack had ever heard it. Emily's eyes sparkled. Oh yeah, he's great at lots of things, just not cooking. She turned to Jack apologetically. Sorry, Dad, but someone had to say it. Remember the great meatloaf disaster of 2022? Emily. Jack started, but Claire interrupted. The great meatloaf disaster? She raised an eyebrow, looking genuinely curious. It was epic, Emily said, leaning forward conspiratorially. The smoke alarm went off. The neighbors called the fire department, and our cat wouldn't come down from the top of the refrigerator for 2 days. It was just a little overdone, Jack protested. Dad, it bounced when you dropped it in the trash can. This time, Claire's laugh burst out before she could stop it. A rich, genuine sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it did Jack. She pressed her fingers to her lips, but her eyes were bright with amusement. I haven't. Claire paused, something vulnerable crossing her face. I can't remember the last time I laughed like that. Emily smiled warmly. Well, stick around us long enough and you'll have plenty to laugh about. Dad's cooking alone could fill a comedy special. Claire's lips twitched again, and Jack watched in amazement as the usual tension in her shoulders began to ease. His daughter had accomplished in minutes what had taken him days. Breaking through Claire's carefully constructed walls with nothing more than honest warmth and laughter. Emily pulled out her phone. Want to see the picture of the meatloaf? I kept it for evidence. Evidence of what? Claire asked, already leaning forward with interest. Why we now order takeout every Tuesday. Emily scooted her chair closer to Claire's. See, that black thing that looks like a meteor? That's supposed to be dinner. As Claire and Emily bent over the phone, sharing another laugh at his expense, Jack felt something warm settle in his chest. He'd known Emily had a gift for connecting with people. She'd been that way since she was little. But watching her draw out Claire's hidden smile, hearing that unexpected laugh echo in the usually stern room, he felt a surge of pride and gratitude. For just a moment, the hospital room felt less like a place of illness and more like somewhere healing could truly begin. Your father's face, Claire said, wiping at her eyes. He has exactly the same expression now as he does in this picture. She caught Jack's gaze, and for the first time since they'd met, her smile reached all the way to her eyes. Emily grinned. That's his, I'm pretending to be offended but actually enjoying this face. I've seen it a lot. I can imagine, Claire said, and laughed again. The sound lighter this time, more natural, as if remembering how it felt to simply be happy. The morning sun streamed through the hospital window, casting a warm glow across Claire's room. She sat propped up against her pillows, her silver hair neatly combed, a slight tremor in her hands as she adjusted the blanket across her lap. Would you mind sitting with me again today? Claire's voice was softer than usual, missing its sharp edge. I've been thinking about what you shared yesterday. Jack pulled up the familiar chair beside her bed. Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. Please call me Claire. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her blanket. You told me about your life. Perhaps it's time I shared some of mine. Jack settled into the chair, his presence steady and patient. Claire's fingers twisted in her lap as she gathered her thoughts. My husband Thomas passed away 3 years ago, she began. Heart attack. Right in the middle of a board meeting. Her voice caught slightly. He was always working. We both were, I suppose. Building our fortune, maintaining our social position. We thought we had all the time in the world. Jack nodded quietly, letting her continue at her own pace. Outside the window, a bird landed on the sill, its wings catching the sunlight. The funny thing is, Claire continued, her voice growing distant, I can barely remember what we did with all that time. The galas, the charity events, the endless business dinners, they all blur together now. She looked down at her hands. But I remember every single piano recital and school play I missed when the children were young. Your children, Jack said gently. You haven't mentioned them before. Claire's face tightened. Michael and Sarah. They're both successful, of course. Michael's a corporate lawyer in Boston. Sarah runs her own tech company in Seattle. Pride and pain mingled in her voice. We made sure they had the best of everything. The finest schools, private tutors, summer programs abroad. She paused, reaching for the water glass on her bedside table. Jack handed it to her, steady and careful. Thank you, she murmured, taking a sip. But somewhere along the way, we lost them. Or maybe they lost us. The phone calls became shorter, the visits less frequent. When Thomas died, her voice wavered. They came for the funeral, of course, stayed 3 days, then back to their lives. Jack watched as Claire blinked rapidly, fighting tears. Have you tried reaching out? Oh, I did. At first. She gave a bitter laugh. But my calls always seemed to catch them at bad times. Meetings, deadlines, their children's activities. Eventually I stopped trying. Pride, I suppose. Or fear. She looked directly at Jack. Fear that they'd reject me outright, instead of just being too busy. The room fell quiet for a moment, filled only with the soft beeping of medical equipment and distant voices in the hallway. And now, Claire continued, her voice barely above a whisper, I find myself here, recovering from surgery, and my biggest fear isn't the pain or the recovery. It's the thought of dying alone, like Thomas did, surrounded by wealth and achievements, but no one who really cares. Jack leaned forward slightly. You're not alone right now. Claire's eyes welled up. No, I'm not. And that's what I don't understand about you, Jack Reynolds. You owe me nothing. I've been horrible to you, to everyone here, yet you keep coming back. Because everyone deserves kindness, Jack said simply. Even those who think they don't. Claire dabbed at her eyes with the corner of her blanket. You remind me of someone I used to be, long ago, before success and status became everything. She glanced around her private room. All this, it was supposed to make us happy, secure. Instead, it built walls I don't know how to tear down anymore. Walls can come down brick by brick, Jack said. You've already started. Claire smiled faintly. Have I? Sometimes I wonder if it's too late to change, to make amends. It's never too late, Jack assured her. Every day is a new chance. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunlight shift across the floor. Claire's shoulders had relaxed, as if sharing her story had lifted a physical weight. Would you? She hesitated. Would you mind coming back tomorrow? Same time? I'll be here, Jack promised, standing up. Same time. As he headed toward the door, Claire called out softly. Jack? He turned back. Thank you. For listening. For not judging. Jack nodded warmly. Get some rest, Claire. As he walked down the corridor, he passed the nurses' station where 2 nurses were speaking in hushed tones. He slowed his pace involuntarily when he heard Claire's name. Claire Whitmore? The first nurse whispered. I can hardly believe it's the same woman who arrived last week. I know, the second nurse replied. She's changing. And it's because of him. Jack quickened his steps, not wanting to eavesdrop further, but he couldn't help the small smile that crossed his face, knowing that somewhere behind those hospital walls, Claire Whitmore was finally beginning to let her own walls down. The hospital cafeteria wasn't known for its ambiance, but Claire had managed to transform their corner table into something special. A clean white tablecloth covered the worn surface, and she'd convinced one of the nurses to find 3 matching place settings. A small vase with fresh daisies sat in the center, brightening the institutional space. Jack and Emily arrived right on time, Emily practically bouncing with each step. She wore a blue dress that matched her eyes, her dark hair pulled back with a ribbon. Jack had changed out of his volunteer smock into a pressed button-down shirt, and Claire noticed he'd even polished his worn work boots. This is so fancy, Emily exclaimed, pulling out her chair. I didn't know the cafeteria could look like this. Claire smoothed her own hospital robe, suddenly self-conscious about not being properly dressed. Well, I did what I could. The food options are rather limited, but I asked them to prepare something special. As if on cue, one of the cafeteria workers appeared with 3 covered plates. She set them down with a warm smile, lifting the covers to reveal grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, and what looked like real mashed potatoes, not the powdered kind usually served. How did you manage this? Jack asked, his eyes wide with surprise. Claire's cheeks flushed slightly. Let's just say I made a generous donation to the cafeteria's equipment fund. It seemed like a fair trade. Emily took a bite of chicken and made an appreciative sound. This is way better than Dad's cooking. No offense, Dad. None taken, Jack chuckled, reaching for his water glass. I know my limitations. As they ate, Claire found herself relaxing into the easy conversation. Emily shared stories about school, her hands animated as she described her science project on butterfly migration. Jack added occasional comments, his quiet pride in his daughter evident in every glance. You know, Claire said, pushing her potatoes around with her fork, I used to have family dinners like this, years ago, before. She trailed off, but Emily jumped in to fill the silence. Well, now you're having dinner with us, and maybe when you're better you can come to our house. Dad makes terrible lasagna, but I'm learning to cook, and I make pretty good cookies. Claire felt something warm and unexpected bloom in her chest. I'd like that very much, Emily. Jack reached across the table and gave Claire's hand a gentle squeeze. You're welcome any time. The simple gesture brought tears to Claire's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. She couldn't remember the last time someone had touched her with such genuine affection. Tell me more about your butterfly project, she said to Emily, eager to keep the moment light. As Emily launched into an enthusiastic explanation of chrysalis formation, Claire found herself studying Jack's face. He was listening to his daughter with such attention, such love. It reminded her of how she used to watch her own children before everything fell apart. Mrs. Whitmore? Emily's voice brought her back to the present. Are you okay? Claire realized she'd been lost in thought. Oh, yes, dear. Just thinking about how nice this is. Having company. She hesitated, then finished softly. Having family. Emily beamed, and Jack's eyes crinkled with warmth. For a moment, the institutional walls seemed to fade away, and they were just three people sharing a meal, sharing their lives. The peaceful moment shattered with the sound of shocked voices from the cafeteria entrance. Mother? What is going on here? Claire's head snapped up. Standing in the doorway were her son Michael and daughter Patricia, their expressions a mix of confusion and disapproval. Michael, in his expensive suit, looked like he'd come straight from his law office. Patricia clutched her designer handbag like a shield. What are you doing here? Claire asked, her voice suddenly tight. We came to check on you, Patricia said, her eyes darting between Jack and Emily. The nurse said you were having dinner in the cafeteria, but we didn't expect this. Michael stepped forward, his face hardening. Mother, who are these people? Before Claire could answer, Emily stood up, extending her hand with natural grace. I'm Emily Reynolds, and this is my dad, Jack. He volunteers here at the hospital. We were just having dinner with your mom. Would you like to join us? The genuine warmth in Emily's offer seemed to throw Michael off balance. He ignored her outstretched hand, turning instead to Claire. Mother, since when do you have dinner with hospital volunteers? Claire sat up straighter, and Jack noticed how quickly her walls were going back up, the softness of moments ago replaced by a familiar sharp edge. Since I chose to, Jack and Emily have been kind enough to keep me company during my recovery. Kind enough? Patricia's voice dripped with suspicion. Mother, you don't need charity from strangers. Jack stood slowly, his movement careful and deliberate. Maybe we should give you some time with your family, Claire. No, Claire said firmly, but her hands were shaking. You don't have to leave. We were having a lovely dinner. Emily looked between the adults, her earlier confidence wavering. She moved closer to her father, who placed a protective hand on her shoulder. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Other cafeteria patrons were trying not to stare, but the scene was drawing attention. Michael took another step forward, positioning himself between Claire and the Reynolds. I think it's best if you leave, he said to Jack, his voice low but threatening. Now, Jack nodded once, his face carefully neutral. Of course. Come on, Emily. He turned to Claire, his voice gentle. Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Whitmore. It was very kind of you. Claire watched helplessly as Jack and Emily walked away, Emily glancing back once with worried eyes. The daisies on the table seemed to wilt under the weight of the silence that followed. Really, Mother? Patricia sighed, dropping into the chair Emily had vacated. What were you thinking? Claire stared at her daughter. seeing the same dismissive expression she'd worn herself so many times before. But now, watching Jack and Emily disappear through the cafeteria doors, it didn't feel like strength anymore. It felt like fear. The warmth from their shared dinner evaporated the moment Claire's children burst into her hospital room. Claire sat up straighter in her bed, her shoulders tense as her son Michael and daughter Catherine stood at the foot of her bed. Their expensive clothes and rigid postures made them look like executives about to start a board meeting rather than children visiting their mother. "What exactly do you think you're doing, Mother?" Catherine's voice cut through the air like ice. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against her crossed arms. Claire lifted her chin. "Having dinner with friends. Something wrong with that?" Michael paced the small room, his designer shoes clicking against the linoleum floor. "Friends? A hospital volunteer and his teenager? Really, Mother? Have you lost your mind?" Outside in the hallway, Jack had returned to retrieve Emily's forgotten sweater from the cafeteria. He slowed his steps as the raised voices carried through the partially open door. "Jack Reynolds is a kind man who—" Claire started. "Who probably Googled your net worth before deciding to be so kind," Catherine interrupted. "We've seen this before, Mother. Remember that art dealer who tried to convince you to invest in his gallery? This is nothing like that." Claire's voice cracked with emotion. "Jack has never asked me for anything. He reads to patients, brings them coffee, listens to their stories." "Perfect cover," Michael cut in. "Get close to wealthy patients when they're vulnerable. I bet he's done this before." Jack's stomach turned. He stood frozen in the hallway, the sweater clutched in his hands, each accusation hitting him like a physical blow. "You don't know him," Claire insisted. "If you just take the time to what? Watch him manipulate you like everyone else has?" Catherine's voice dripped with disdain. "We've seen your bank statements, Mother. The donations to the hospital's volunteer program? The art supplies you ordered for the children's ward? He's already got you spending money." "Those were my choices." Claire's voice rose. "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing something meaningful. Jack and Emily helped me see that I could—" "Oh, the daughter's part of it too," Michael scoffed. "Quite the little act they've got going. Get the sweet teenager to soften you up while Daddy works his angle." Jack backed away from the door, his heart pounding. The sweater in his hands felt heavy, tainted somehow by the accusations. He'd known people might question his motives, but hearing it laid out so brutally made him question every interaction, every smile, every moment of connection he'd shared with Claire. He made his way down the hall in a daze, barely noticing the familiar faces that nodded hello. By the time he reached the parking lot, Emily was already waiting by their old pickup truck, scrolling through her phone. "Dad? What's wrong?" Emily's smile faded as she saw his expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Jack tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. He handed her the sweater without meeting her eyes and unlocked the truck. The engine sputtered to life, and they pulled out of the parking lot in silence. Finally, at a red light, Jack spoke. "Maybe we should take a break from visiting the hospital for a while." Emily turned to him sharply. "What? Why?" "It's complicated, sweetheart." Jack's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Sometimes people can misunderstand things, and I don't want to cause any trouble." "What people? Claire's kids?" Emily's voice rose. "Did they say something to you?" Jack sighed. "They didn't say anything directly to me, but they're concerned about their mother. They think I might have ulterior motives." "That's ridiculous." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "They don't even know you. They don't know how many nights you've stayed late just to make sure lonely patients had someone to talk to. They don't know how you helped Mr. Jenkins write letters to his grandkids, or how you fixed Mrs. Martinez's radio so she could listen to her favorite shows." "Emily, no." She wiped angrily at her eyes. "Claire needs us. She was so different today at dinner. She was happy. You can't just walk away because some stuck-up rich kids think they know better." Jack pulled into their driveway but didn't turn off the engine. The headlights illuminated their small house, the porch light they'd left on casting a warm glow. "Please, Dad." Emily's voice softened, thick with emotion. "Remember what you always tell me about doing the right thing, even when it's hard? Claire is our friend now. We can't abandon her just because it got complicated." Jack stared straight ahead, his daughter's words settling heavy in his chest. The accusations from Claire's children echoed in his mind, but so did the memory of Claire's laughter at dinner, the way her eyes had lit up when Emily showed her pictures from school, The genuine warmth in her voice when she'd thanked him for making her feel human again. "Dad?" Emily reached over and put her hand on his arm. Tears streamed down her cheeks now. "Please don't give up on her. Please." The morning sun filtered through the hospital window, casting long shadows across Claire's room. She sat in her bed, her silver hair neatly combed, looking more determined than Jack had ever seen her. Her hands were folded in her lap, but her knuckles were white from gripping them too tightly. "I won't let them chase you away," Claire said firmly as Jack hesitated in the doorway. "I'm not a child who needs their permission to have friends." Jack shifted his weight, uncomfortable. His volunteer badge felt heavy against his chest. "Mrs. Whitmore, I don't want to cause any trouble between you and your family." "Please, it's Claire," she corrected him, her voice softening. "And you're not causing trouble. They're doing that all on their own." She patted the chair beside her bed. "Come sit down, Jack. Please." He moved slowly into the room, settling into the familiar chair. The events of the previous evening weighed heavily on him. The harsh words he'd overheard, the accusations of taking advantage of a wealthy patient. "Your children are just trying to protect you," he said gently. Claire let out a short, bitter laugh. "Protect me? They haven't visited in months until now. They're protecting their inheritance, not me." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the water glass on her bedside table. Jack automatically stood to help her, but she waved him off. "I can manage," she insisted, taking a careful sip. "You know what really matters to me right now?" That dinner last night, before they arrived, seeing Emily laugh, hearing your stories, I felt human again, Jack. Not just some rich old lady in a hospital bed. The sincerity in her voice made Jack's chest tighten. He thought of his own daughter, how she'd brightened up talking with Claire, how natural it had felt, until the interruption. "I understand why you're hesitating," Claire continued, her blue eyes sharp and clear. "But I'm asking you, as a friend, don't let their suspicions rob us both of something good." Jack rubbed his chin thoughtfully, remembering Emily's tearful plea the night before. "My daughter said something similar last night," he admitted. "She was pretty upset at the idea of not visiting you anymore." A smile touched Claire's lips. "Smart girl. You're Emily. She takes after her father that way, seeing past people's thorny exteriors." "You're not that thorny," Jack said with a small grin. "Oh, I was. Still can be." Claire adjusted her position, wincing slightly. "But that's exactly why I need you, both of you, to keep visiting. You remind me there's more to life than being bitter and alone." Jack studied her face, seeing the mix of pride and vulnerability there. He thought about his years of military service, how sometimes the right thing to do wasn't the easy thing. "All right," he said finally. "But we do this properly. I'll speak with the nurse supervisor, make sure everything's documented and above board." Relief flooded Claire's features. "Thank you," she said simply. "Now," Jack said, standing up, "I actually came to tell you about something. The hospital's running an art therapy class this morning. I remembered you mentioning you used to paint." Claire's eyes widened. "Oh no, I haven't touched a pencil or brush in years. Perfect time to start again then." Jack's voice was gentle but firm. "The therapist running it is excellent, very patient." Claire fidgeted with her blanket. "I don't know." "Just come look," Jack encouraged. "If you don't like it, we'll leave, but it might be good to get out of this room for a while." After some more gentle persuasion, Claire agreed. Jack helped her into a wheelchair, noting how she tried to hide her nervousness behind complaints about the hospital gown and her messy hair. He pushed her down the sunny corridor to the hospital's activity room. The art therapy class was already in progress when they arrived. Several patients sat at tables covered in drawing paper and art supplies. Soft classical music played in the background. The art therapist, a young woman named Sarah, welcomed them warmly. "We're just doing some simple sketching today," Sarah explained, helping Claire settle at a table. "Nothing fancy, just drawing what makes us happy." Jack watched as Claire picked up a pencil, her hand trembling slightly. She stared at the blank paper before her, looking almost afraid to make the first mark. "You don't have to create a masterpiece," he said quietly, sitting beside her. "Just let the pencil move." Claire took a deep breath and began to draw. Her first lines were hesitant, barely visible on the paper. But gradually, as the minutes passed, her strokes became more confident. Jack noticed her shoulders relaxing, the worried crease between her eyebrows smoothing out. To his surprise, a small garden began to take shape on her paper. Flowers, a bench, and what looked like a small fountain. The sketch was simple but had a gentle beauty to it. "It's the garden at my old house," Claire explained softly, not looking up from her work. "I used to spend hours there, painting. After Richard died, I just stopped." Her hand moved across the paper with increasing sureness. "I'd almost forgotten how this feels." Jack watched her face as she worked, seeing the years of guardedness fall away. Her eyes had taken on a new light, focused and alive with creative energy. Other patients at nearby tables occasionally glanced over, smiling at her absorption in her work. "This is really good," he said, meaning it. Claire laughed softly, adding details to a flower petal. "It's terribly rusty work, but..." She sat back, looking at her sketch with wondering eyes. "I forgot how much joy this brings me. How did I let myself forget that?" The morning light streamed through the activity room windows, catching the silver in Claire's hair and the brightness in her eyes as she bent over her drawing again, adding more details to her remembered garden. Jack sat quietly beside her, understanding that sometimes the biggest victories came in the smallest moments, in the steady stroke of a pencil, in the rediscovery of long-buried joy. The hospital's recreation room buzzed with quiet energy as Jack sat in a circle with 5 veterans. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, warming the plain cream walls and worn carpet. His familiar blue volunteer badge caught the light as he leaned forward in his chair. "So there I was," Jack said, his voice steady and warm, "stuck in that sandstorm with nothing but a compass and my training." His hands moved as he spoke, painting pictures in the air. The other veterans leaned in, their faces showing understanding that went deeper than words. At the other end of the room, Claire had set up an impromptu art corner. She sat with 3 patients, her hospital gown now covered by a light blue cardigan she'd asked her nurse to bring from home. Her elegant hands moved confidently across a sketch pad as she demonstrated basic drawing techniques. "Don't worry about making it perfect," Claire told Sarah, a young woman recovering from surgery. "Art isn't about perfection. It's about expressing what's in your heart." Her voice had lost its sharp edge from those first days, replaced by a gentleness that surprised even her. Jack paused his story to glance over at Claire. The change in her was remarkable. Just a week ago, she'd been hesitant to join the hospital's group activities. Now here she was, teaching others, her face alive with purpose. "Keep going, Jack," urged Tom, one of the older veterans. "What happened after the storm?" Jack smiled and continued his tale, but he kept one eye on Claire's group. She was showing them how to sketch simple flowers, her pencil making swift, sure strokes across the paper. The other patients watched in wonder as beautiful blooms appeared under her guidance. During a break, Claire walked over to Jack's group, her sketch pad tucked under her arm. "May I show them what I drew while listening to your story?" she asked. Jack nodded, and Claire turned her pad around. There on the paper was a striking image of a soldier standing strong against a swirling storm, his uniform whipping in the wind but his stance unwavering. The veterans murmured in appreciation. "That's exactly how it felt," Jack said softly, meeting Claire's eyes. She smiled, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. As the days went by, their little groups grew. Word spread through the hospital about the veteran volunteer who told stories that made you feel less alone, and the elegant patient who could teach anyone to draw. They worked in comfortable tandem, each using their gifts to help others heal. One afternoon, Claire sat with Maria, an elderly patient who hadn't spoken since arriving at the hospital. Claire guided Maria's trembling hand across the paper, helping her draw a simple garden scene. Suddenly, Maria whispered, "My mother had a garden just like this." Claire squeezed Maria's hand, her own eyes growing misty. Jack, who had been watching from across the room, felt his heart swell with pride. During their sessions, Jack shared stories not just of war, but of courage in everyday life, raising Emily alone, finding strength in community, learning to smile again after loss. His words resonated with patients facing their own battles. Claire, meanwhile, discovered she had a talent for helping others find their artistic voice. "Everyone has creativity inside them," she would say, her patience endless as she guided shaking hands and uncertain spirits. One particularly good day, they helped organize a small art display in the recreation room, featuring work from their patients. The walls came alive with sketches, some wobbly, some skilled, all deeply meaningful to their creators. As they stood back to admire the display, Claire turned to Jack. Her face was softer than he'd ever seen it. the harsh lines of worry smoothed away by purpose and joy. "Do you know what you've done?" she asked, her voice quiet but full of emotion. Jack shook his head. "I haven't done anything special. You've given me back purpose," Claire said, touching his arm gently. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to be useful, to make a difference." Jack smiled at her words, but deep inside, a knot of worry tightened. He thought of Claire's children's angry faces, of the whispers in the hallways, of how quickly happiness could slip away. But he kept these fears hidden, not wanting to dim the light in Claire's eyes. They stood together, watching as a young patient showed his family the sketch he'd made under Claire's guidance. The boy's face glowed with pride as his parents praised his work. Around them, the recreation room hummed with conversation and laughter, a warm atmosphere of healing and hope they had helped create. Claire's eyes sparkled with unshed tears of joy as she watched the scene before them. Her hand found Jack's and squeezed it briefly, a gesture of gratitude that said more than words ever could. The afternoon sun painted everything in soft gold, and for that moment at least, everything was perfect. Jack pushed his fears aside and let himself enjoy the simple pleasure of standing beside Claire, watching the good they'd done together bloom like one of her beautifully sketched flowers. Claire tapped her pencil against the small notepad in her lap, her elegant handwriting filling the page with ideas. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through her hospital room window, and the familiar sounds of the ward quiet conversations, shuffling feet, the occasional announcement created a gentle backdrop to her plotting. Nurse Linda leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, a knowing smile on her face. "So you really want to do this for him?" "He deserves it," Claire said firmly, her voice carrying the warmth that had replaced her former sharp edge. "Jack's been here every day, helping everyone, asking nothing in return. And it's not just me. Have you seen how he is with the veterans and physical therapy?" Linda nodded, stepping into the room. "That man's got a gift, that's for sure. Yesterday he spent 2 hours helping Mr. Peterson work up the courage to try walking again." Claire's eyes lit up. "Exactly. And did you know he was a Silver Star recipient?" Emily mentioned it casually, but Jack's never said a word about it himself. She shook her head in amazement. "Such humility." "All right then," Linda said, pulling up a chair. "What do you need from me?" Claire straightened in her bed, suddenly all business. "First, we need to keep this completely quiet. Jack can't suspect anything. Can you help coordinate with the other nurses? We'll need the recreation room for about an hour." Linda pulled out her own notepad. "What time were you thinking? Next Friday evening? Jack always volunteers then, and Emily doesn't have school activities." Claire's fingers traced the edge of her blanket. "I want Emily there. She should see her father honored properly." Over the next hour, Claire and Linda worked out the details. They would transform the recreation room with simple decorations. Claire insisted on ordering proper refreshments, none of that instant coffee nonsense. And Linda agreed to handle the logistics of getting various staff members and patients to attend. "What about the certificate?" Linda asked. "We should have something to present to him." Claire's face brightened. "Leave that to me. I've been practicing my calligraphy, and I have an idea for a design." She reached for her sketchbook, showing Linda a rough draft she'd been working on. The nurse's eyebrows rose in appreciation. "Claire Whitmore, you've been holding out on us. This is beautiful." Claire felt her cheeks warm. "Well, Jack encouraged me to start drawing again. It seems fitting to use that gift to honor him." Throughout the week, Claire worked on her secret project whenever Jack wasn't around. She enlisted other patients to help with small tasks, finding joy in how eagerly they joined the conspiracy. Mr. Peterson offered to say a few words about Jack's help with his recovery. Mrs. Rodriguez from the cancer ward insisted on bringing her guitar to play something special. The day before the ceremony, Claire sat with Emily in the hospital cafeteria while Jack was busy with other patients. The teenager's eyes were bright with excitement as they finalized the plans. "Dad has no idea," Emily said, stirring her hot chocolate. "He thinks we're just having a normal volunteer evening tomorrow." Claire smiled, watching the girl's enthusiasm. "You've done a wonderful job keeping the secret, dear. Are you ready for your part?" Emily nodded firmly. "I've got my camera all set up. Dad never lets anyone make a fuss about him, but he can't stop me from taking pictures this time." Claire reached across the table and squeezed Emily's hand. "You know, your father's kindness gave me back my smile. But you, Emily Reynolds, You gave me back my laugh. I haven't forgotten that. Emily's eyes grew misty. He's different too, you know. Happier. Before, he was always taking care of everyone else but himself. Now he actually hums sometimes. The next evening arrived with a flutter of nervous excitement. Linda had managed to transform the recreation room beautifully. Simple blue and white streamers hung from the ceiling, and someone had found a small American flag to display. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, with a small podium at the front. Claire's carefully crafted certificate, with its elegant calligraphy and detailed border design, waited in a simple frame. Patients and staff filled the seats quietly, all in on the surprise. Emily stationed herself near the door with her camera, practically bouncing with anticipation. Claire stood at the podium, smoothing her best blouse, the first real clothes she'd worn since her surgery. Her heart beat quickly, but for once, her nervousness felt like joy rather than anxiety. Right on schedule, Linda led an unsuspecting Jack into the room. He stopped short in the doorway, his usual composed expression giving way to complete surprise as everyone stood and applauded. Emily's camera clicked rapidly, capturing his wide-eyed amazement. "What's all this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "Jack Reynolds, please come forward. We have something to say to you." Still looking stunned, Jack made his way to the front of the room. Claire could see the emotion he was trying to contain, the way his hands clasped and unclasped at his sides. "When I first met you," Claire began, her voice carrying to every corner of the hushed room, "I was angry at the world. I had walls built so high, I couldn't even see over them anymore." She paused, meeting his eyes. "But you, with your quiet strength and endless patience, you didn't try to break those walls down. You simply showed me there was a door, and you waited until I was ready to open it." Mr. Peterson spoke next, describing how Jack's encouragement had helped him take his first steps after his stroke. Mrs. Rodriguez played a soft melody on her guitar while other patients and staff members shared brief stories of Jack's impact on their lives. Finally, Claire lifted the framed certificate. "This is a small token of our appreciation, but what we really want you to know is this. You came here to serve others, but you've built a community. You've shown us that even in our darkest moments, kindness can light the way forward." Jack stepped forward to accept the certificate, and Claire could see he was fighting back tears. His hands trembled slightly as he held the frame, studying the artwork she had created for him. "I've spent my life trying to serve," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion. "First my country, then my family, now here. But what you've all given me." He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on Emily's proud face, then returning to Claire. "What you've given me is far more than I could have imagined." The room burst into applause again. Emily rushed forward to hug her father, her camera dangling forgotten around her neck. Claire watched them, her own eyes misty, as she spoke one final time. "Jack Reynolds, you didn't just restore my faith in humanity. You reminded all of us that it's never too late for the heart to heal, to grow, to find joy again." She smiled at him through her tears. "Thank you for showing us the way." The warm glow of the afternoon ceremony had barely faded when Claire heard the sharp click of expensive heels against the hospital floor. She knew those footsteps. Her shoulders tensed as her daughter Margaret burst through the door, followed by her son Thomas. Their faces were flushed with anger, their designer clothes seeming oddly out of place in the simple hospital room. "Mother, have you completely lost your mind?" Margaret's voice cut through the peaceful quiet. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled as she clutched her leather handbag. "A ceremony? For a volunteer?" Claire straightened in her bed, her chin lifting slightly. "Jack Reynolds deserves recognition for his service, both to our country and to this hospital." Thomas stepped forward, his tailored suit making soft, swooshing sounds. "This isn't about his service, Mother. This is about you making a spectacle of yourself and our family name." He ran a hand through his graying hair so much like his father's. "The Whitmores don't associate with..." "With what, Thomas?" Claire's voice was sharp. "With kind, honest people who actually care about others?" In the hallway, Jack had been passing by with his cleaning cart, intending to say goodnight to Claire. He froze at the sound of raised voices, his hand hovering near the door handle. "He's using you, Mother." Margaret's voice rose higher. "Can't you see it? A widowed veteran, probably struggling to make ends meet, suddenly befriending one of the wealthiest women in town." Claire's laugh was bitter. "Is that what this is about? Money? Have you both become so cynical that you can't recognize genuine kindness anymore? We're trying to protect you, Thomas insisted, his expensive watch catching the light as he gestured. This man, this volunteer, he's beneath us. What will people say? The papers would have a field day if they knew Claire Whitmore was throwing parties for hospital staff. Jack's hand dropped from the door handle, his chest tightening. Each word felt like a physical blow, reminding him of every doubt he'd tried to push away. Beneath us? Claire's voice shook with fury. Jack Reynolds has more dignity in his little finger than either of you have shown in years. Where were you both when I had surgery? When I needed someone to talk to hold my hand? We have careers, Mother, Margaret snapped. Important responsibilities. We can't just drop everything to visit your dying mother? Claire's words hung in the air like icicles. No, you're right. Better to leave that to someone beneath us. In the hallway, Jack's shoulders slumped. He could hear the pain in Claire's voice, but her children's words echoed in his mind. What right did he have to be in her life? A simple veteran, a widower who cleaned floors and pushed wheelchairs, while her family moved in circles of wealth and influence. This ends now, Thomas declared. We've already spoken to the hospital administration. They agree this relationship is inappropriate. A volunteer shouldn't be spending so much personal time with a patient. Claire's voice cracked. You had no right. We have every right, Margaret interrupted. We're your family, not this man who probably sees you as his ticket to an easier life. Jack stepped back from the door, each word hitting him like shrapnel. He thought of Emily, of how proud she'd been at the ceremony, how she'd started to see Claire as family. But now all he could think about was how this might affect his daughter. If people started questioning his motives, if rumors spread. Get out! Claire's voice was low and dangerous. Both of you, get out of my room. Mother, be reasonable. I said get out. Jack heard the shuffle of feet, the angry mutters, the door opening and closing. He quickly moved away, pushing his cart down the hall, trying to make himself invisible as Claire's children stormed past him. They didn't even glance his way, but he felt smaller in their wake. He made it to the supply closet before letting out a shaky breath. Leaning against the metal shelving, he closed his eyes. The ceremony from earlier felt like a distant dream now, tainted by ugly reality. Claire's children were right about one thing. He didn't belong in their world. The cleaning supplies surrounded him with their harsh chemical smell, reminding him of his place. He thought of Claire's kind eyes, of Emily's joy when they'd all shared meals together, of the way Claire's face lit up when she talked about her art. But now all he could see was the sneering faces of her children. All he could hear were their accusations. Jack's hands trembled as he gathered his belongings. He couldn't go back to Claire's room, couldn't face her after hearing all of that. What if her children were right? What if his presence in her life was causing more harm than good? The thought of anyone questioning his intentions made him sick to his stomach. Quietly, methodically, he cleaned up his cart and stored it away. His movements were automatic, trained by years of military discipline, but his heart felt heavy as lead. He signed out at the nurse's station without his usual warm goodbye, avoiding the concerned looks from the staff who had celebrated with him just hours before. The hospital corridors seemed longer than usual as he walked toward the exit. Each step took him further from Claire's room, from the connection they'd built, from the small family they'd started to create. But maybe that was for the best. Maybe some distances weren't meant to be bridged. As the automatic doors slid open to the evening air, Jack paused. He could turn around, go back, tell Claire he didn't care what anyone thought. But the weight of social judgment, the fear of hurting his daughter's reputation, the echo of those cruel words, it all held him back. With heavy steps, he walked to his car, unsure if he would find the courage to return tomorrow. The setting sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, and for the first time since meeting Claire, the loneliness felt crushing again. The fluorescent lights of the pediatric ward buzzed overhead as Jack Reynolds pushed a cart of books down the hallway. His footsteps were heavy, his shoulders slumped despite his military straight posture. Every time he passed the east wing where Claire's room was, his heart clenched, but he kept walking. Mr. Reynolds, little Tommy, a regular in the children's ward, called out from his bed. Are we getting story time today? Jack managed a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Of course, buddy. How about The Little Engine That Could? As he read to the children, His voice carried the story's enthusiasm, but his mind kept drifting to Claire's room 3 floors above. He could almost hear Margaret's accusations echoing in his head. Beneath our social class, taking advantage, humiliating the family. At home that evening, Emily watched her father push his meatloaf around his plate. The silence between them felt thick and uncomfortable, so unlike their usual warm dinner conversations. "Dad," Emily finally said, putting down her fork, "this is the 3rd night you haven't mentioned Mrs. Whitmore. What happened after the ceremony?" Jack's fork clinked against his plate. "Nothing happened, sweetheart. Just giving her some space with her family." "Space?" Emily's eyebrows drew together. "Since when do you give up on people who need you?" "Emily," Jack's voice carried a warning tone, but she pressed on. "No, Dad. I saw how happy she was during that ceremony. How proud she was to honor you. Something happened, and you're not telling me." Jack stood up, carrying his barely touched plate to the sink. The running water couldn't drown out Emily's words or his own thoughts. "Her children think I'm trying to take advantage of their mother," he finally admitted, his back still turned. "They think I'm beneath them." "That's ridiculous!" Emily pushed back her chair, the legs scraping against the floor. "Mrs. Whitmore doesn't think that. She sees you for who you really are." Jack turned around, leaning against the counter. His daughter's fierce expression reminded him so much of her mother that it made his chest ache. "Sometimes," he said softly, "doing the right thing means stepping back. Those are her children, Emily. I won't come between a family." "But we're becoming her family too," Emily's voice cracked. "You always taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who cares. And now you're just walking away?" Jack closed his eyes, remembering Claire's face during the ceremony, how it had lit up with joy, how she'd spoken about him restoring her faith in humanity. But then he remembered Margaret's sneering face, Thomas's cold accusations. "It's complicated, honey." "No, it's not," Emily insisted. "You're scared. Just like you were scared to start volunteering after Mom died. Just like you were scared to let me go to summer camp. But you did those things anyway because they were right." In the pediatric ward the next morning, Jack found himself telling stories mechanically, his usual animated expressions subdued. The nurses noticed, exchanging worried glances. One of them, Nancy, caught him in the hallway. "Claire's been asking for you," she said quietly. "She won't eat her breakfast unless someone promises you'll visit." Jack's hands tightened on the book cart. Tell her I'm busy with the children's ward." Nancy's kind face creased with concern. "Jack Reynolds, I've known you for 3 years. You've never backed down from helping someone who needs you. What changed?" "Her family," he started. "Her family abandoned her here for months before you came along," Nancy interrupted. "They showed up for exactly 2 visits before this week, and now they think they can dictate who gives their mother comfort?" Jack shook his head. "I don't want to cause more trouble." "The trouble was there long before you arrived," Nancy said firmly. "You just helped her find the strength to face it." Back home that evening, Emily was waiting for him at the kitchen table, her homework spread out but untouched. She'd made his favorite coffee, black with just a hint of sugar, and placed it at his usual spot. "I did some thinking today," she said as he sat down, "about Mom." Jack's breath caught. Emily rarely initiated conversations about her mother. She always said that love was an action, not just a feeling, Emily continued. "That's why she married you, because you showed up every day, even when it was hard, even when her parents didn't approve of a soldier marrying their daughter." Jack stared into his coffee cup, seeing his wife's face in his memories, her determination when she'd told her wealthy parents she was choosing love over their expectations. "Mrs. Whitmore reminds me of Mom sometimes," Emily said softly. "The way she doesn't let fear stop her from caring, the way she fights for what matters." In her hospital room, Claire sat alone, a sketchbook open on her lap. Her hands moved across the paper, capturing Jack's kind eyes, Emily's bright smile. The room felt colder without their presence, the silence heavier than it had ever been before. She'd refused her children's attempts to transfer her to a private facility. "This is my home now," she'd told them firmly. "These people are my family." But now, as the evening shadows crept across her room, doubt gnawed at her heart. She touched the sketch gently, tracing the lines of Jack's face, the quiet strength, the gentle humor she'd captured in pencil strokes. "Please don't leave me too," she whispered to the empty room, clutching the sketch to her chest as tears began to fall. The paper wrinkled slightly under her grip, but she didn't care. It was all she had left of the brief, beautiful moment when she'd felt part of something real, something warm, something that mattered more than social status or family obligations. In the growing darkness, Claire Whitmore, who had spent decades building walls around her heart, felt them crumbling entirely, leaving her more vulnerable than she'd ever been. The morning dawned gray and cold as Jack walked through the hospital's automatic doors, his volunteer badge hanging familiar and heavy around his neck. Something felt different today. The usual warm greetings from the staff were replaced with averted eyes and hushed whispers. Before he could reach the supply closet for his morning duties, Sandra, the head nurse, intercepted him. Her face was drawn with worry. "Jack," she said softly, "Dr. Martinez needs to see you in his office, right now." The walk to the administrator's office felt like marching toward court-martial. Jack's military training kicked in, shoulders back, chin up, prepare for the worst. When he entered, Dr. Martinez wasn't alone. A man in a suit sat beside his desk, papers spread before them. "Mr. Reynolds," Dr. Martinez began, not quite meeting Jack's eyes. "Please, sit down." Jack remained standing. "What's this about, sir?" The man in the suit cleared his throat. "I'm Richard Spencer, the hospital's legal counsel. We've received some concerning documentation this morning." He slid a thick folder across the desk. Jack's hands were steady as he picked it up, but his heart hammered against his ribs as he read the first page. "Petition for emergency guardianship," he read aloud, "on behalf of Claire Whitmore, deemed mentally unfit." His voice caught. "Accusations of psychological manipulation by hospital volunteer Jack Reynolds. Claire's children filed this with the court this morning," Dr. Martinez explained, his voice heavy. "They're claiming you've exploited their mother's vulnerable state to influence her decisions." Jack's mind flashed to the ceremony, to Claire's bright eyes as she thanked him publicly, to the sketch of him and Emily that still sat on her bedside table, to all the quiet moments of genuine connection. "This is ridiculous," he said firmly. "Claire is completely competent. She's been making remarkable progress." "They've included statements from 2 private psychiatrists," Richard interrupted, "suggesting her judgment may be impaired by medication and post-surgical trauma. They specifically cite her unusual attachment to hospital staff as evidence." Jack's military discipline cracked slightly. "Unusual attachment? She was alone here for months before I started visiting her. Where were they then?" Dr. Martinez raised his hands placatingly. "Jack, please understand, we know you've done nothing wrong, but until this is resolved, you're suspending me." "It wasn't a question, temporarily," Dr. Martinez assured him. "We can't risk the hospital's reputation," Jack finished flatly. He reached up and slowly removed his volunteer badge, placing it carefully on the desk. "I understand, sir." "Jack!" Sandra called out as he strode past the nurse's station. Her eyes were wet. "We'll fix this. Claire will fight it." "No." Jack cut her off, his voice tight. "Don't let her do anything. They'll just use it as more evidence against her." He paused, swallowing hard. "Just tell her I'm sorry." The drive home was a blur. Jack found himself sitting in his parked car in the driveway, staring at nothing for what felt like hours. The sound of Emily's school bus pulling up finally pushed him to move. Emily burst through the front door, her backpack sliding off one shoulder. "Dad? What are you doing home so early?" Jack stood in the kitchen, trying to find the right words. How do you tell your daughter that trying to help someone had somehow made everything worse? "Dad?" Emily's voice sharpened with worry. "What's wrong?" He sank into a kitchen chair, head dropping into his hands. "I've been suspended from volunteering." "What? Why?" "Claire's children." His voice roughened. "They've filed legal papers saying she's not mentally competent. They're saying I manipulated her, took advantage of her while she was vulnerable." "That's crazy," Emily exploded. "Mrs. Whitmore is one of the sharpest people I know. And you would never—" "It doesn't matter what's true," Jack said quietly. "They have money, lawyers, private doctors willing to say what they want. And now the hospital has to protect itself." Emily pulled out the chair next to him, sitting close. "But Mrs. Whitmore will tell them the truth. She'll fight this." Jack shook his head. She can't. Anything she does now, they'll just say it proves she's not thinking clearly. Fighting will only make it worse for her. So what, we just give up? Emily's voice cracked. Let them win? Let them lock her away from everyone who actually cares about her? I might have ruined everything, Jack whispered, his hands clenching. I should have kept my distance when her children first objected. Should have known they'd never accept someone like me being close to their mother. Emily stood up so suddenly her chair scraped against the floor. No, I won't let you do this, Dad. I won't let you think you did anything wrong by being kind, by caring about someone who needed it. She began pacing the kitchen, her inherited military bearing showing in her straight spine and lifted chin.
You taught me that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing.
That true strength isn't about money or power. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. She stopped in front of him, her young face fierce with determination. Well, I'm standing up. I'll tell everyone how Mrs. Whitmore really is, how she helps other patients, how she laughs at my silly jokes, how she's more alive now than when we first met her. I'll tell them how you never asked her for anything, never took anything, you just gave her back her smile. Jack looked up at his daughter, seeing both her mother's fire and his own stubborn sense of justice blazing in her eyes. His chest ached with pride, even his fear for what lay ahead tightened around his heart. I don't want you caught up in this mess, honey, he said softly. I already am, Emily replied. We're family, yours and Mrs. Whitmore's, and family stands together. Jack sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone. Claire's number flashed on the screen for the third time that morning. His hand hovered over the device, trembling slightly. The last thing he wanted was to cause more trouble, but ignoring her calls felt wrong after everything they'd shared. Finally, he answered. Claire, Jack Reynolds, don't you dare shut me out now. Claire's voice carried that familiar sharp edge, but underneath lay something fragile. I've requested an emergency hearing. The judge agreed to see us tomorrow morning. Jack's stomach tightened. Claire, I don't think... No, you listen to me. Her tone softened. These past months, you taught me to stand up for what matters. Now it's my turn to fight. But I need you there. I'll only make things worse, Jack said, running a hand through his gray hair. Your children already think I'm trying to take advantage of you. If I show up in court, then they'll see exactly who you are, Claire interrupted. A man of honor. A veteran who serves others expecting nothing in return. The person who gave me back my dignity when I'd forgotten what that felt like. Jack closed his eyes, remembering the suspension letter from the hospital. His volunteer badge sat on the counter where he'd placed it yesterday, a reminder of everything he stood to lose. The hospital already suspended me. Maybe it's better if I just step back, let things calm down. That's exactly what they want, Claire's voice cracked. They want to isolate me again, control me with their money and their power. Please, Jack, don't let them win. The pain in her voice cut through him like a knife. Still, he hesitated. I need to think about Emily. If this gets ugly, Dad? Emily appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in her pajamas, her dark hair messy from sleep. She'd clearly been listening. Is that Mrs. Whitmore? Jack nodded, covering the phone with his hand. Go back to bed, sweetheart. It's early. Instead, Emily walked over and sat across from him. Her eyes, so like her mother's, held that same determined look he remembered from years ago. You're not really thinking of abandoning her, are you? Emily, it's complicated. No, it's not. Emily reached across the table and took his free hand. Remember what you told me about your time in the service? That sometimes doing the right thing means standing your ground even when you're scared? Jack's throat tightened. He'd said those words to her years ago, after she'd witnessed bullying at school and felt helpless to stop it. Mrs. Whitmore needs you, Emily continued, her voice gentle but firm. She needs us. If you walk away now, you're proving them right. She needs you, Dad. Jack looked at his daughter, seeing not just the child he'd raised, but the wise young woman she was becoming. Her words echoed in his mind, stirring something deep within his chest. That same sense of duty that had guided him through war zones and the lonely years after losing his wife. He lifted the phone back to his ear. Claire, I'm still here, she answered softly. What time is the hearing? 9 tomorrow morning. Family court downtown. The relief in her voice was palpable. We'll be there, Jack said, squeezing Emily's hand. All of us. After hanging up, Jack sat in silence for a moment, studying his daughter's face. "When did you get so grown up?" Emily smiled, her eyes misty. "I had a pretty good teacher." She got up and hugged him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder like she used to do when she was little. "You know what Mom would say about this?" Jack's heart squeezed at the mention of his late wife. "What's that?" "She'd say sometimes family isn't about who you're born to, but who you choose to stand beside." Emily kissed his cheek. "And she'd be proud of you for not giving up." Jack nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Outside, the sun was rising, painting the kitchen in soft morning light. He thought about Claire, alone in her hospital room, fighting for her right to choose her own path. He thought about Emily, wise beyond her years, reminding him of what truly mattered. Tomorrow would bring its own battles, but for now, he knew with certainty that they'd made the right choice. Sometimes the hardest roads led to the most important destinations, and sometimes, as Emily had said, family was about who you chose to stand beside. The mahogany doors of courtroom 3B seemed to loom before Jack like the gates of a fortress. He adjusted his tie for the 10th time. The crisp blue fabric Emily had helped him pick out suddenly feeling too tight around his neck. The morning sun filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Emily's small hand slipped into his. "It's going to be okay, Dad," she whispered, her teenage face carrying a maturity that sometimes caught him off guard. She wore her best dress, navy blue with white flowers, her hair neatly braided. They weren't the first to arrive. Claire's children had come early, their expensive suits and dresses marking them as clearly as neon signs. Thomas Whitmore Jr., Claire's eldest, sat with perfect posture in the front row, his wife Susan beside him. Both wore expressions of practiced disdain. Behind them, Margaret and Richard, Claire's other children, huddled with their lawyers, whispering urgently. The courtroom filled steadily. Jack recognized several nurses from the hospital, their presence both comforting and concerning. Had they come to support or scrutinize? His palms grew sweaty as he noticed some of the hospital administrators, their faces carefully neutral. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed through the room. Judge Patricia Martinez entered, her gray hair pulled back severely, reading glasses perched on her nose. As everyone settled back into their seats, Jack couldn't help but notice the invisible line dividing the room. On one side sat Claire's children with their legal team, all power suits and leather briefcases. On the other side sat Jack, Emily, and a handful of hospital staff who had dared to come. Claire's lawyer, Mr. Peterson, approached the bench first. "Your Honor, we're here today because Mrs. Claire Whitmore's children have filed a petition questioning their mother's mental competency, specifically regarding her relationship with Mr. Jack Reynolds, a hospital volunteer." Thomas Whitmore Jr.'s lawyer stood next, a tall woman with sharp features. "We have evidence suggesting Mr. Reynolds has exercised undue influence over Mrs. Whitmore, taking advantage of her vulnerable state during her hospital stay." Jack felt his face flush. Emily's grip on his hand tightened. The morning proceeded with a parade of witnesses. Hospital administrators testified about Jack's volunteer record. Spotless, they admitted under questioning. Nurses described the changes they'd observed in Claire since meeting Jack, all positive, though the opposing lawyers tried to spin it as concerning behavior. Thomas Jr. took the stand, his voice dripping with rehearsed concern. "Mother has always been particular about her social circle," he said, adjusting his gold cufflinks. To suddenly see her spending time with a volunteer, hosting some sort of ceremony for him, it's completely out of character. We're worried about her judgment. Margaret testified next, dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. "She's given him access to her private rooms, allowed his daughter to visit. Who knows what they might be after? Our mother is wealthy and vulnerable. And, objection? Speculation," Claire's lawyer interrupted. "Sustained," Judge Martinez said firmly. Richard, the youngest, barely looked at Jack as he spoke. "We're just trying to protect our mother's interests. Mr. Reynolds has no business involving himself in our family affairs." Jack felt each word like a physical blow. These people knew nothing about him, about his relationship with Claire, about the simple joy of seeing someone rediscover their spark for life. They saw only what their prejudices allowed them to see, a working-class veteran trying to climb above his station. Emily leaned close, whispering, "They're wrong about you, Dad. Everyone who really knows you knows that." A small commotion at the courtroom door drew everyone's attention. Claire entered, walking slowly but steadily, her head held high. She wore a simple but elegant blue dress, her silver hair styled perfectly, despite her children's claims about her mental state. Her eyes were clear and focused. The room fell silent as she made her way to the witness stand. Jack noticed how she didn't look at her children, but her gaze found him and Emily, lingering for a moment. The ghost of a smile touched her lips before she turned to face the judge. "Please state your name for the record," the clerk requested. "Claire Elizabeth Whitmore," she answered, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. "Mrs. Whitmore," her lawyer began gently, "would you like to tell the court about your relationship with Mr. Reynolds?" Claire straightened in her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Though her voice trembled slightly, her words rang with determination as she began to speak. "Your Honor, I'd like to tell you about the first time I met Jack Reynolds and how his kindness changed everything." Claire Whitmore sat perfectly straight in the witness chair, her hospital gown replaced by a simple gray dress that somehow made her look both vulnerable and dignified. Her hands, usually so steady with her sketch pencils, trembled slightly as she placed them in her lap. The courtroom buzzed with whispers until the judge called for order. Jack could feel the weight of stares from Claire's children. Sharp, accusatory glances that made his shoulders tense. Emily's small hand found his, squeezing gently. "Mrs. Whitmore," her attorney began, "please tell the court about your relationship with Mr. Reynolds." Claire took a deep breath, her eyes finding Jack's across the room. The corners of her mouth lifted slightly, that familiar half-smile he'd come to know so well during their hospital visits. "I met Jack Reynolds 3 months ago," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I was difficult, to put it mildly. I had just had surgery, I was in pain, and I treated him terribly." She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "But he came back. Every single day, he came back." One of Claire's daughters scoffed audibly, but Claire continued, her chin lifting. "I've had wealth all my life. I've had people bow and scrape and tell me what they thought I wanted to hear. But Jack, he was different. He never pretended. He never sought anything from me. He simply cared." The judge leaned forward slightly, clearly interested. Claire's voice grew warmer as she described their daily interactions. "He would read to other patients near my room, knowing I was listening even when I pretended not to be. He brought his daughter Emily to visit, and for the first time in years, I remembered what it felt like to laugh genuinely." Claire's eyes welled with tears. "Do you know how long it had been since I truly laughed?" Jack felt his own eyes growing moist as Claire continued. She described their art therapy sessions, how Jack had encouraged her to pick up sketching again after decades of letting her talent lie dormant. "I drew this in the hospital," Claire said, reaching for a folder her attorney handed her. She pulled out a sketch, the one she'd made of Jack, telling stories to the veterans in the therapy group. "Look at the faces in this drawing. These are men who've seen war, who've lost so much. But Jack gives them hope. He reminds them they're not forgotten." Her voice cracked slightly as she went on. "My children claim he's after my money. They say he's manipulating me." She looked directly at her family, her voice growing firm. "But in all our time together, Jack has never once asked me for anything. Not money, not favors, not even small gifts. Instead, he gave. He gave me his time, his stories, his compassion." The courtroom was utterly silent now as Claire described the recognition ceremony she'd organized. "I wanted to honor him because that's what we do for people who make the world better. My children called it embarrassing. They called it beneath our social class." She shook her head, tears flowing freely now. "But they don't understand. Jack gave me something priceless. He gave me purpose again." Emily's grip on Jack's hand tightened as Claire continued. "Before Jack, I spent my days bitter and alone. Now I help other patients through art. I share stories with the veterans. I have a reason to get up each morning." She looked directly at the judge. "Is that the action of someone being manipulated? Or is that the natural response to being shown genuine kindness?" Claire's voice grew softer, but in the silent courtroom, every word carried. "I've had every material comfort imaginable, Your Honor. But sitting in that hospital room, I was dying inside. Not from my surgery, from loneliness, from feeling useless, from believing my life was over." She straightened in her chair, her voice growing stronger. "Jack Reynolds and his daughter showed me I was wrong. They showed me family isn't just about blood. It's about who stays when things are hard. It's about who makes you want to be better." Taking another tissue, Claire dried her eyes and faced the courtroom squarely. My children want to declare me mentally unfit because I've found friendship with someone they consider beneath us. But I've never been more clear-headed in my life. The judge was watching intently as Claire delivered her final words. The truth is simple, Your Honor. He never asked me for anything. He only gave. The courtroom fell into complete silence, the weight of Claire's words hanging in the air. Jack sat perfectly still, Emily's hand warm in his, as they waited for what would come next. When Emily Reynolds stood to take the witness stand, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. At 15, she looked almost small behind the wooden podium, but her chin was lifted with quiet determination. She smoothed her navy blue dress, the one she usually saved for special occasions, and placed her hand on the Bible. After taking the oath, Emily settled into the chair, her eyes finding her father's face in the crowd. Jack nodded slightly, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. Miss Reynolds, Claire's attorney said kindly, could you tell us about your father? Emily cleared her throat. My dad's the kind of person who gets up at 5 every morning to make me breakfast before school, she began, her voice steady despite her nervousness. He's done that every day since Mom died, even when he was struggling with his own grief. The attorney nodded encouragingly. And how long has he been volunteering at the hospital? 3 years now. Emily's face brightened. He started going after he noticed how lonely some of the patients were. He said nobody should have to face hard times alone. She glanced at Claire, who was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. That's just who he is. Could you tell us about your father's military service? Emily sat up straighter, pride evident in her posture. Dad served for 20 years. He doesn't talk about it much, but I know he received medals for bravery. He saved 3 of his fellow soldiers during an ambush. Her voice grew softer. Sometimes he still has nightmares about it, but instead of letting those experiences make him bitter, he uses them to help others. He especially connects with the veterans at the hospital. One of Claire's children shifted uncomfortably in their seat, while another whispered to their lawyer. And how has your father's relationship with Mrs. Whitmore affected you? The attorney continued. Emily's eyes lit up. It's been wonderful. Mrs. Whitmore teaches me about art, and she always asks about my school projects. She even helped me prepare for my history presentation last week. She paused, gathering her thoughts. But more importantly, I've seen how she makes my dad smile again. He was so lonely after Mom died, even though he tried to hide it from me. The defense attorney stood up. Objection, Your Honor. The witness's observations about her father's emotional state are speculative. Overruled, Judge Peterson replied, leaning forward with interest. Continue, Miss Reynolds. Emily took a deep breath. Dad taught me that true integrity means doing the right thing even when it's hard, even when people doubt your motives. He's never once asked Mrs. Whitmore for anything. Not money, not favors, nothing. He just wanted to be her friend because he saw she was hurting, just like he was. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. The other day, one of Mrs. Whitmore's children accused my dad of being beneath their social class. But Dad always taught me that real class isn't about money or status. It's about how you treat people who can't do anything for you in return. The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter paused, her fingers hovering over the keys. When Mrs. Whitmore was having a really bad day, Emily continued, her voice growing stronger, Dad would stay past his volunteer hours just to make sure she wasn't alone. He'd miss his favorite TV shows or delay starting dinner. He did it because that's who he is. Someone who puts others first. She looked directly at Claire's children now. My dad's not trying to take advantage of your mom. He's just being the same person he's always been. Someone who sees people's pain and tries to help. The same way he helped his fellow soldiers. The same way he helped me after Mom died. And the same way he helps every patient at that hospital. Judge Peterson leaned forward in his chair, his expression thoughtful as he studied Emily's earnest face. Claire's children exchanged worried glances, their earlier confidence visibly shaken. Miss Reynolds, the attorney said, one final question. What would it mean to you and your father if he couldn't volunteer at the hospital anymore? Emily's lower lip trembled slightly, but her voice remained clear. It would break his heart, not just because of Mrs. Whitmore, but because helping others is what gives his life meaning. After everything he's been through, the war, losing Mom, The hospital became his way of turning pain into purpose. She looked at Claire again, and watching Mrs. Whitmore find her smile again, seeing her share her art with other patients. It reminded him that beautiful things can grow from broken places. The judge removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose thoughtfully. Claire's children huddled closer together, whispering urgently to their attorney. Their faces showed the first signs of doubt since the hearing began. In the gallery, Jack sat with his hands clasped tightly, tears streaming down his face as he listened to his daughter's testimony. Claire reached across the aisle and touched his shoulder gently, both of them watching as Emily continued to speak truth to power with the simple, unshakable conviction of youth. Judge Peterson rested his elbows on his desk, leaning forward with evident interest as Emily concluded her testimony. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. Where there had been skepticism, now there was a palpable sense of understanding. Claire's children, who had entered the courthouse so certain of their position, now exchanged nervous glances, their earlier confidence replaced by visible unease. Jack Reynolds rose slowly from his seat, his weathered hands steady despite the tremors in his heart. The familiar weight of his service medals, pinned carefully to his navy suit jacket, reminded him of another time when duty and honor had guided his path. The courtroom silence pressed against him like a physical thing, but he'd faced worse pressures before. "Your Honor," he began, his voice quiet but clear, carrying the same steady tone he'd used to comfort countless patients. "I've been asked why I spent so much time with Mrs. Whitmore. The truth is simple, though it might not seem so to others." He glanced briefly at Claire's children, their faces set in hard lines of suspicion. "When I returned from my last tour, I struggled to find purpose. My wife had passed, leaving me with our daughter, Emily. The silence in our home was deafening. But I remembered something my commanding officer once told me. Service doesn't end when you take off the uniform." Jack's fingers brushed against his medals unconsciously. "I started volunteering because I needed to feel useful again. When I met Mrs. Whitmore, Claire, she reminded me of myself after losing my wife." Behind her sharp words, I recognized that same loneliness, that same fear of being left behind by the world. He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Your Honor, I never sought anything from Claire except the chance to be a friend. Just as I served my country because it was right, I served at the hospital for the same reason. Some of Claire's children suggest I was after her money or status." A slight smile touched his lips. "But I've never needed much. My daughter and I live simply. We have enough." The judge leaned forward, studying Jack's face. "Mr. Reynolds, why continue visiting Mrs. Whitmore after her children raised objections?" Jack's expression softened. "Because abandoning someone who trusts you is wrong, sir. In the Army, we never left anyone behind. I couldn't walk away just because the situation became difficult. Claire needed someone to listen, to remind her she had value beyond her wealth or status. Every person deserves that basic dignity." One of Claire's daughters scoffed audibly, but Jack continued undeterred. "I've spent my life trying to teach my daughter Emily about integrity, about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Walking away from Claire would have taught her that it's okay to abandon people when things get complicated. That's not the lesson I want her to learn." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "And the ceremony Mrs. Whitmore organized for you? I was embarrassed, honestly," Jack admitted, running a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "I never wanted recognition. Claire arranged it without telling me. She said she wanted to show others that kindness still matters, that simple acts of friendship can change lives." He swallowed hard. If anything, that ceremony showed Claire's generous heart, not mine. One of the lawyers stood up. "Mr. Reynolds, isn't it true that you spent hours alone with Mrs. Whitmore? That you ate meals with her? Brought your daughter to visit?" "Yes," Jack answered simply. "Claire was lonely. Sometimes she just needed company. Someone to share a meal with or tell her about their day. Emily brought laughter back into her life. We became friends, nothing more, nothing less." "And you never accepted any gifts from Mrs. Whitmore?" the lawyer pressed. "No, sir. The only gift was friendship itself." Jack's voice remained steady. "In the military, we learned that true strength often comes from helping others stand tall. That's all I tried to do for Claire. Help her remember her own strength." The judge interrupted. "Mr. Reynolds, if this court rules in Mrs. Whitmore's favor, do you intend to continue your friendship with her?" Jack straightened his shoulders, the soldier in him responding to the direct question. Yes, Your Honor, if Claire wishes it. Not because of any benefit to me, but because that's what friends do. They stand by each other. My service taught me that loyalty and honor aren't just words. They're choices we make every day. He looked directly at Claire's children. I understand your concern for your mother. If I had wealth to leave Emily, I'd want to protect it too. But Claire doesn't need protection from friendship. She needs what we all need. To know that she matters to someone. That her life has meaning beyond her bank account. The courtroom remained silent as Jack continued. When I first met Claire, she wouldn't even look at me. Now she helps other patients through her art. Shares stories with them. Brings light to their darkest days. That transformation didn't come from me. It came from within her. Once she remembered she was more than just a wealthy woman in a hospital bed. His voice grew softer. I never sought anything but friendship, Your Honor. In return, I found something priceless. The joy of watching someone rediscover their worth. You can't put a dollar value on seeing hope return to someone's eyes. As Jack finished speaking, he finally allowed himself to look at Claire. She sat straight-backed in her chair, tears streaming silently down her face, but her eyes shone with unmistakable pride. The same pride he'd seen in his wife's eyes long ago. The same pride he saw in Emily's. The pride of someone who recognized truth when they heard it. Something passed between them in that moment. An understanding that went beyond words. They were two people who had found each other in the winter of their lives, not seeking romance or advantage, but simple human connection. And in that connection, they had both found healing. Claire smiled at him across the courtroom, her eyes filled with pride, and Jack felt the weight of judgment fall away. Whatever the court decided, he knew he had spoken his truth. He had served with honor, as he always had, as he always would. Judge Peterson leaned forward in his high-backed leather chair, his silver-rimmed glasses catching the afternoon light that streamed through the courtroom windows. His weathered face showed the careful consideration of a man who had spent decades weighing matters of justice. The room held its breath, the heavy silence broken only by the soft whir of the ceiling fans above. Having heard all testimony and reviewed the evidence presented, Judge Peterson began, his voice carrying the measured tone of authority. This court finds no basis for declaring Mrs. Claire Whitmore mentally unfit. Claire's shoulders relaxed visibly, while her children shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The judge continued, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom. Furthermore, the accusations against Mr. Jack Reynolds are not only unfounded but stand in direct contradiction to the character testimonies provided by multiple hospital staff members. He paused, removing his glasses to look directly at Claire's children. This court is troubled by what appears to be an attempt to control Mrs. Whitmore's personal associations through legal manipulation. Emily, sitting beside her father, grabbed his hand and squeezed it tight. Jack remained still, his military bearing evident in his straight posture and calm expression, though his eyes shone with relief. Mrs. Whitmore has demonstrated clear decision-making capacity, Judge Peterson continued. She has shown not only sound judgment, but admirable character in fostering meaningful connections within her community. The petition is dismissed. The sharp crack of the gavel echoed through the courtroom. Claire's youngest son stormed out, while her daughter remained seated, her face a mix of shame and uncertainty. The older son, who had led the legal charge, stood frozen, his expensive suit suddenly seeming to weigh heavily on his shoulders. Claire's attorney, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, leaned over to whisper something in her client's ear. Claire nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a delicate handkerchief. The victory felt both wonderful and painful. A mother shouldn't have to defend her right to friendship in court against her own children. As the courtroom began to clear, nurses who had testified on Claire's behalf came forward to hug her. The head nurse, who had watched Claire's transformation over the past months, beamed with pride. Justice was served today, she declared, patting Claire's shoulder. Jack stood quietly to the side, wanting to give Claire space to process the moment. Emily, however, had other ideas. She bounded over to Claire and threw her arms around her. "We did it!" she exclaimed, her teenage enthusiasm breaking through the formal atmosphere. Claire hugged Emily back, laughing softly through her tears. "We certainly did, dear heart." She looked over Emily's shoulder at Jack, who still maintained a respectful distance. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, all the worry and strain of the past weeks seemed to melt away. The courthouse corridors were alive with echoing footsteps and murmured conversations as people filed out. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long rectangles of warmth across the polished floor. Claire made her way through the small crowd toward Jack, her steps purposeful despite her recent surgery. "Jack Reynolds," she called, her voice carrying the same authority it had when they first met, but now wrapped in warmth rather than defense. "Don't you dare stand over there like a stranger." He moved forward then, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Emily watched them both, her young face glowing with satisfaction at seeing the two people she'd come to care for most standing together again. Claire reached for Jack's hand, her fingers trembling slightly as they clasped his. The touch was simple, but profound, a connection that had survived scrutiny, judgment, and legal challenges. Her eyes, bright with unshed tears, met his steady gaze. "We won," she whispered, her voice carrying all the relief and joy of the moment. Jack's hand tightened gently around hers, his quiet strength as present as it had been that first day in the hospital. Around them, the courthouse continued to empty, but they stood still in their small bubble of triumph, their joined hands a testament to the power of genuine friendship over prejudice and suspicion. Emily watched her father's face soften, seeing the worry lines that had creased his forehead over the past weeks finally begin to smooth away. Claire's other hand reached out to include the teenager in the moment, forming a small circle of three in the midst of the departing crowd. The afternoon sun continued to pour through the courthouse windows, wrapping them in warm light. In that moment, they weren't a wealthy patient, a volunteer veteran, and his teenage daughter. They were simply family, bound together by choice rather than blood, stronger for having faced this challenge together. The head nurse, gathering her things to leave, paused to watch them. She smiled, remembering the bitter woman Claire had been just months ago, and the quiet way Jack had persisted in showing kindness despite all resistance. Sometimes, she thought, the best medicine wasn't found in any hospital pharmacy but in the simple act of one heart reaching out to another. Claire's fingers remained intertwined with Jack's, her whispered words of victory hanging in the air between them like a promise of better days to come. The courthouse was nearly empty now, but they stood together, savoring this moment of vindication and relief, knowing that sometimes the biggest wins come from simply standing firm in what you know to be true. The automatic doors of St. Michael's Hospital slid open with their familiar whoosh, welcoming Jack Reynolds back after what felt like an eternity away. The morning sun streamed through the glass entrance, casting long shadows across the polished floor. Jack adjusted his volunteer badge, newly reissued, the plastic still crisp and shiny against his pressed blue shirt. His footsteps echoed in the quiet lobby, but the silence didn't last long. Nancy, the head nurse who'd been there his first day 5 years ago, spotted him from behind the reception desk, her face lit up like a Christmas tree. "He's here," she called out, her voice carrying down the hallway. "Jack's back." Suddenly, the peaceful morning erupted into joyful chaos. Staff members emerged from every direction, nurses pausing their rounds, orderlies stopping their work, even Dr. Martinez stepping out of the elevator with a broad smile. They surrounded Jack, offering handshakes, hugs, and words of welcome. "We missed you something awful," said Betty, one of the evening shift nurses, her eyes misty behind her glasses. "It hasn't been the same without your stories." Jack felt his cheeks flush with emotion. "I missed all of you too," he managed, his voice rough with feeling. From the physical therapy wing, he heard the squeak of wheelchair wheels. Several patients he'd worked with before were making their way toward him, led by old Mr. Peterson, who'd been in recovery for months after his hip surgery. "There's our hero," Mr. Peterson called out, waving his cane in the air. "Finally, someone who can tell a decent joke around here." The crowd parted as Sarah, the hospital administrator who'd had to suspend him during the legal troubles, approached with an envelope in her hands. Her professional demeanor cracked as she smiled warmly. "Jack," she said, "this is from all of us." She handed him the envelope, which contained a card signed by what looked like the entire hospital staff. "We never doubted you for a moment. We just had to follow procedure, you understand." Jack nodded, thumbing through the pages of signatures and messages. "Of course, no hard feelings." "And now," Sarah continued, "we have a surprise for you. We've created a new position. We'd like you to help coordinate our volunteer program, along with your regular duties. You've shown us all what real service looks like." Jack blinked rapidly, overwhelmed by the offer. Before he could respond, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. "He'll accept," Claire said firmly, making her way through the gathering. She wasn't in a hospital gown anymore, but wore a elegant blue dress that matched her eyes. "Though you'll have to share him with me. I've already signed up as a volunteer myself." The assembly broke into applause and laughter. Jack stared at Claire, taken aback by how different she looked outside of her hospital room. Stronger, more vibrant, like a butterfly emerged from its chrysalis. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly as the crowd began to disperse, returning to their duties. Claire's eyes sparkled with determination. "Jack Reynolds, you taught me that the best way to heal is to help others heal. I've spent too many years focused on myself. It's time I learned from your example." Together, they began walking the familiar hospital corridors. Jack showed Claire the various wings where volunteers were needed: the children's ward with its colorful murals, the rehabilitation center where patients worked to regain their strength, the long-term care unit where lonely souls needed companionship most. "I thought we could start an art therapy program," Claire suggested as they passed the hospital's small recreation room. "My sketches seemed to help others when I was a patient. Maybe we could expand on that." Jack watched her as she spoke, noting how animated she became while discussing her ideas. This was a far cry from the bitter woman who'd once snapped at him for entering her room too quietly. The transformation wasn't just physical, it ran soul deep. They stopped by the nurses' station to pick up their volunteer assignments for the day. The staff had already grown used to seeing them together, treating them as a team. Claire organized the paperwork with efficient grace while Jack checked the schedule of patients requesting visits. "Mr. Harrison in 302 needs someone to read to him," Jack noted. "His eyesight's not what it used to be." "Perfect," Claire replied. "I brought some poetry books. Emily helped me pick them out." The mention of his daughter made Jack smile. Emily had been right all along about not giving up on Claire. Looking at her now, confident and purposeful in her new role, he could hardly believe anyone had ever questioned her competence or spirit. They made their rounds together, moving from room to room with synchronized ease. When Jack told stories to veterans, Claire added thoughtful questions that drew out even the quietest patients. When Claire sketched portraits for the elderly residents, Jack engaged them in conversation that brought genuine smiles to their faces. In the pediatric ward, they found their rhythm. Claire taught a young girl recovering from surgery how to draw butterflies, while Jack entertained her roommate with tales of his daughter's adventures in school theater. The children's laughter echoed down the hallway, drawing curious looks from passing staff. "You know," Claire said as they left the room, "I used to think volunteering was beneath me. Now I understand it's the most important work I've ever done." Jack nodded, understanding completely. "It's not about status or recognition. It's about being there when someone needs you." They paused by a window overlooking the hospital garden. The morning had stretched into afternoon, sunlight painting the flowers in bright colors. Through the glass, they could see other volunteers tending to the plants or pushing patients in wheelchairs along the paths. "We make a good team," Claire observed, straightening Jack's slightly crooked volunteer badge with familiar ease. Jack couldn't help but agree. Where once he'd walked these halls alone, carrying his own burden of grief and loneliness, he now had a partner who understood both the weight of loss and the power of giving. Claire's presence beside him felt right, as if all their struggles had led them to this precise moment. They continued their rounds, their footsteps falling naturally in sync. Patients and staff alike smiled as they passed, recognizing in them something rare and valuable. Two people who had found their calling in serving others, and in doing so, had found each other. The afternoon sun filtered through the hospital cafeteria windows, casting warm patches of light across the tables. Jack and Claire sat sharing a quiet moment over tea when a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Sarah Whitmore, Claire's youngest daughter, stood hesitating at the entrance. Her designer outfit seemed out of place among the casual hospital surroundings, but there was something different about her demeanor. Gone was the haughty confidence she'd displayed in the courtroom. Claire's hand tightened around her paper cup. Jack noticed her knuckles turning white and gently placed his hand near hers, a silent gesture of support. Sarah took a few uncertain steps forward, her heels clicking against the linoleum floor. "Mom?" Her voice wavered. "Could we talk?" Claire straightened in her chair, her face a careful mask. "I think you said quite enough in court, Sarah. Please, Sarah's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes or the slight tremor in her lower lip. "I need to tell you something." Jack started to rise. "I should give you two some privacy." "No." Both women spoke at once. Claire's hand shot out to grasp his wrist while Sarah shook her head. "Actually, Mr. Reynolds, I'd like you to stay. What I have to say concerns you, too." Jack settled back into his chair, watching as Sarah pulled up a third seat. She perched on its edge, like a bird ready to take flight. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Sarah began, fiddling with her wedding ring, "about why I acted the way I did." She swallowed hard. "After Dad died, everything changed. You withdrew from us, Mom. The house felt like a mausoleum. And then when you got sick." She trailed off, blinking rapidly. Claire's expression softened slightly. "Go on." "I was scared," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Terrified, actually. Not just of losing you to illness, but of losing what little connection we had left. When I heard about Mr. Reynolds, about how much time you were spending together," she looked at Jack directly for the first time, "I convinced myself you were taking advantage of my mother's vulnerability. It was easier than admitting I was jealous of the relationship you two had built." "Oh, Sarah." Claire's voice cracked. "I watched you at the hearing," Sarah continued. "The way you spoke about finding purpose again, about friendship and joy. I haven't seen you that alive since before Dad died." And then Emily's testimony. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "That young girl showed more wisdom and grace than I did. I was so wrapped up in my own pride, in what our social circle might think, that I couldn't see what was right in front of me." Jack cleared his throat softly. "What was that?" "That you gave my mother back to herself." Sarah's shoulders slumped. "While I was busy trying to control her life, you were actually helping her live it again." Claire reached across the table, touching her daughter's hand. "I know you were trying to protect me, in your own way." "No." Sarah shook her head firmly. "I was trying to protect myself. From change, from losing status, from having to admit I'd failed you after Dad died. I'm so sorry, Mom. And Mr. Reynolds, Jack, I'm sorry for the horrible things I said about you. You didn't deserve any of it." Jack nodded, his expression gentle. "Fear makes us do things we regret sometimes. The important thing is recognizing it." Claire looked at him with grateful eyes before turning back to her daughter. "Sarah, I won't pretend the last few months haven't hurt deeply. But you're here now, trying to make it right. That counts for something. Can we?" Sarah hesitated. "Can we maybe start over? All of us?" "I'd like that," Claire said softly. She glanced at Jack. "What do you think?" "I think," Jack said, rising from his chair, "that this conversation calls for something stronger than tea. How about some real coffee from the cafe down the street? My treat." Sarah's tight smile relaxed into something more genuine. "I'd like that." They walked together to the small cafe just outside the hospital grounds, the autumn breeze rustling through fallen leaves around their feet. The barista knew Jack by name, and soon they were settled at a corner table, 3 steaming cups between them. The conversation was tentative at first, like people learning to walk on ice. But gradually, the awkward pauses grew shorter. Sarah asked about Claire's art therapy sessions. Claire inquired about Sarah's children. Jack shared a funny story about Emily's latest school project. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when old hurts flickered across faces, when words were chosen too carefully. But as they sat there, the afternoon light growing softer around them, something new began to take root. Fragile as a seedling, but full of hope. The morning light streamed through the hospital windows as Jack arranged chairs in a circle for the day's storytelling session. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but his mind wandered to Claire, who would arrive any minute with her art supplies. These past few weeks of volunteering together had brought a new rhythm to his life, one that made his heart feel lighter than it had in years. "Need help with those chairs?" Claire's voice carried from the doorway, warm and familiar. She stood there holding her canvas bag filled with sketchbooks and colored pencils, her silver hair neatly styled and her blue eyes twinkling. "I've got it covered," Jack replied, straightening up with a smile. "Though I wouldn't mind some artistic direction on the arrangement." Claire set her bag down and studied the circle critically, though her lips curved upward. Perhaps a bit closer together. We want to encourage conversation, after all. As they adjusted the chairs together, their hands brushed occasionally, sending small thrills through Jack's body. He found himself stealing glances at her more often lately, admiring the way she carried herself with such grace, how her face lit up when she talked about art. "First group arrives in 15 minutes, Claire said, consulting her watch. "Shall we review today's plan?" Jack nodded, pulling out his notebook. "I thought we could start with the World War II story you suggested. The one about the nurse who kept her patients' spirits up by teaching them to draw." "Perfect choice," Claire agreed, touching his arm lightly. "And I brought some simple sketching exercises to go along with it. Nothing too challenging, just enough to help them express themselves." They had discovered that combining Jack's storytelling with Claire's art activities created something special. Patients who usually stayed quiet found themselves opening up, sharing their own stories through words and pictures. The hospital staff had noticed the impact, and their weekly sessions now had a waiting list. As they finished setting up, more volunteers arrived to help, including Sarah, a nurse who had supported their program from the start. She gave them both a knowing smile as she arranged art supplies on the table. "You two make quite the team," Sarah commented, watching them work in such natural synchronization. Jack felt his cheeks warm slightly, but Claire responded with easy confidence. "We complement each other well," she said, giving Jack a soft look that made his heart skip. The session began, and Jack watched in admiration as Claire moved among the patients, encouraging them with gentle words and helpful suggestions. She had such a natural way with people now, so different from the angry, isolated woman he'd first met months ago. During a quiet moment, while the patients were absorbed in their sketching, Claire came to stand beside him. "Remember when I thought I'd forgotten how to connect with people?" she whispered. Jack nodded, remembering those early days when she'd pushed everyone away. "You just needed to remember who you really were." "No," she corrected him softly. "I needed someone to believe in me first." Her fingers found his, squeezing gently. The touch sent warmth spreading through his chest. These small moments of connection had been happening more frequently lately, each one feeling more natural than the last. Jack had been surprised to discover that his heart still knew how to flutter, still knew how to hope. After the session, they worked together cleaning up, their movements in comfortable harmony. Claire hummed quietly as she organized her art supplies, a habit Jack had come to love. "Emily asked if you'd like to join us for dinner this weekend," Jack mentioned, stacking the last chair. "She's trying out a new recipe she learned at school." Claire's face brightened. "I'd love to, though perhaps I should bring dessert just in case." She winked, referencing Emily's last culinary experiment, which had ended with them ordering pizza. Jack chuckled. Probably wise, though don't tell her I agreed with that suggestion. As they gathered their belongings, Jack noticed Claire looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What is it?" he asked. She shook her head slightly, smiling. "I was just thinking about how different my life is now, compared to 6 months ago. I never expected." She paused, searching for words. "I never expected to find this kind of joy again." Jack understood completely. He thought his heart would always remain closed after losing his wife, that being a father to Emily would be enough. But life had surprised him with this unexpected second chance at happiness. They walked together through the hospital corridors, their steps falling naturally in sync. Other staff members greeted them warmly. They had become a familiar and welcome sight in these halls. "Same time tomorrow?" Claire asked as they approached the parking lot. "Wouldn't miss it," Jack replied, holding the door open for her. The evening air was cool and fresh, with stars just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Jack walked Claire to her car, as he did every evening, though they both knew she no longer needed the assistance. At her car door, Claire turned to face him. Her eyes met his with warmth and certainty that made his pulse quicken. Then, with gentle grace, she leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. The aroma of pot roast wafted through Jack's modest kitchen, mingling with the sound of laughter. Sunlight streamed through the worn, checkered curtains, casting warm patterns across the pine dinner table where Jack, Claire, and Emily sat together on a peaceful Sunday afternoon. Emily leaned forward, barely containing her giggles as she recounted her latest school adventure. "And then, just as Mr. Peterson turned around, Tommy's science project exploded. There was blue foam everywhere." "Oh my," Claire said, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Her elegant silver hair caught the light, and her usually perfect posture had relaxed into comfortable familiarity. "I haven't laughed this much in years." Jack watched them both, his heart full. The simple pleasure of having people he loved around his dinner table still felt like a miracle. He remembered countless quiet meals with just Emily, both of them trying their best after losing her mother. Now, the kitchen rang with joy. "Dad," Emily said, pointing her fork at him, "tell Claire about the time you tried to make Thanksgiving dinner by yourself." Jack groaned good-naturedly. "Now, that's not fair. I was doing my best. The turkey was still frozen in the middle," Emily declared triumphantly. Claire reached over and patted Jack's hand. "Well, I must say, your cooking has improved considerably. This pot roast is wonderful. That's because you taught him how to properly season things," Emily said. "Before you came along, it was all salt and pepper." Jack smiled, remembering how Claire had gently taken over his kitchen one evening, showing him how to bring out the flavors in simple dishes. She'd moved through his humble space with grace, never once making him feel inadequate about his basic cooking skills or modest home. The afternoon light softened, and Emily cleared the plates, insisting on doing the dishes herself. "You two go sit in the living room," she ordered. "I've got this." Jack and Claire settled onto the old couch, their shoulders touching. Through the window, they could see the small garden where Claire had helped plant autumn flowers, adding color to what had been just a patch of grass. "Sometimes," Claire said softly, "I look around and can hardly believe how different everything is from that first day in the hospital. Do you remember? I was absolutely horrible to you." "You were hurting," Jack replied, his voice gentle. "We all handle pain differently, but you saw through it. You saw me." Claire's eyes grew misty. "I had everything money could buy, but I was so lonely. My children were strangers. I'd forgotten how to create anything beautiful." She gestured to her latest sketch hanging on Jack's wall, a portrait of Emily laughing. From the kitchen came the quiet clinking of dishes and Emily's humming. The familiar domestic sounds wrapped around them like a warm blanket. "When Sarah died," Jack said, referring to his late wife, "I thought that was it for me. My only job was to raise Emily and serve others however I could. I never expected." He trailed off, squeezing Claire's hand. "Life surprises us," Claire murmured. She watched Emily through the kitchen doorway, remembering how the teenager had defended them both in court, her young voice strong and clear. "That daughter of yours, she's extraordinary." "She is," Jack agreed proudly, "and she adores you." Claire's breath caught. After months of estrangement, one of her own children had finally reached out, inspired by Emily's example of unconditional love. Small steps toward healing had begun. "You know," she said, "I used to think I was too old to start over, too set in my ways, too damaged by disappointment." Jack turned to face her, his eyes kind, the same steady kindness that had first broken through her defenses in the hospital. "It's never too late for love," he said simply. Emily emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene, her father and Claire, both with silver in their hair, both with lines of experience on their faces, both glowing with contentment. "I made coffee," Emily announced, "and I found the cookies Claire brought." As Emily arranged the coffee cups on the small table, Claire felt tears welling up, not tears of loneliness or bitterness like before, but of pure gratitude. This small house, with its worn furniture and love-filled rooms, had become more of a home than her grand, empty mansion ever was. "You gave me back life," Claire said to Jack, her voice thick with emotion. "And somehow, you gave me back family too." Jack clasped her hand, his eyes shining with tenderness. Emily beamed at them both, her young face radiant with joy at seeing such pure love bloom in life's later season. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jack Reynolds, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.